Some dinosaurs were strong hunters, others were big and well protected, but not every prehistoric creature was smart. Among the huge meat-eaters and noisy herds, there were also the clumsy, the awkward, and the very silly ones. From animals with big heads and tiny brains to ones that looked like they were made to trip over their own tails, the time of the dinosaurs had plenty of strange and funny creatures. So, how did they ever manage to survive? Before we begin tonight's episode, subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments below where in the world you're watching from. We're always fascinated to hear where our viewers are tuning in from. The Stegosaurus was one of the strangest and most unforgettable dinosaurs to ever walk the earth. It looked like a living fortress, with its massive, heavy body, small head, and double row of large leaf-shaped plates rising along its back like the sails of a prehistoric ship. Its tail carried long, sharp spikes that could pierce through flesh and bone, and yet, for all that strength and armour, this mighty creature was guided by one of the smallest brains in all of dinosaur history. For an animal that stretched as long as a city bus and weighed several tons, its brain was no larger than a walnut. Scientists have long been amazed by that odd contrast, a gigantic body ruled by such a tiny mind. The Stegosaurus lived during the late Jurassic period, about 150 million years ago, in what is now North America. In that ancient world, vast plains were covered with ferns, cycads, and tall conifer trees, and giant plant-eating dinosaurs moved slowly through the forests, while meat-eating predators like Allosaurus hunted them. In this landscape, the Stegosaurus was one of the most heavily built herbivores, using its small head to strip low-growing plants, while its massive body lumbered forward on 4 thick pillar-like legs. It was not fast, and it probably relied on its size and armour to protect itself from the dangers of its time. The most famous part of this dinosaur story is its tiny brain. When scientists studied the fossilised skulls of Stegosaurus, they were puzzled to find that the space where the brain once sat was shockingly small. It was about the size of a large walnut or a lime, weighing less than 100 grams. For an animal that could be around 9 meters long, that was unbelievably small. Many people like to joke that Stegosaurus was one of the dumbest dinosaurs, and while that may not be fair, it's easy to understand why it earned that reputation. The small brain meant that Stegosaurus probably had simple behaviours. It did not need to be clever or fast to survive. Instead, it depended on instinct. It likely spent its days eating, walking, and occasionally using its spiked tail to defend itself. Its life was not about strategy or complex social behaviour, like some later dinosaurs might have had. Its body did the work for it. Its strength and armour made up for its lack of intelligence. The spikes on its tail were not just for show. Known as the Thagomizer, this deadly weapon was one of the most powerful defensive tools in the dinosaur world. There were usually 4 spikes, each one more than a metre long, sticking out like spears from the end of its tail. When attacked by a predator, the Stegosaurus could swing its tail with incredible force. Scientists have found injuries on Allosaurus bones that match the shape of Stegosaurus spikes, which means these battles really happened. One well-aimed swing could kill or seriously wound even a large predator. What makes this even more impressive is that Stegosaurus had to coordinate such movements with that tiny brain. For a long time, paleontologists wondered how it managed to control its huge body with such limited brain power. Some early scientists even suggested that Stegosaurus had a second brain in its hip region, a large cavity near the base of the spine that they thought might have helped control the tail and back legs. This idea became popular for a while, and it made the Stegosaurus seem even stranger, a creature so simple that it needed an extra brain to function. But later studies showed that the cavity was not a second brain at all. It was more likely a space for a glycogen body, something found in birds today that helps store energy. So, sadly for fans of odd trivia, Stegosaurus only had 1 brain, and it really was that small. Still, its brain was not useless. It was perfectly suited for the dinosaur's way of life. The Stegosaurus did not need to solve problems, hunt prey, or use tools. It simply had to find food, avoid predators, and reproduce. Its instincts guided it to eat the right plants, to sense danger, and to defend itself. In that sense, it was smart enough for what nature required. A bigger brain would have been wasted on such a slow, heavily armoured creature. The body of Stegosaurus was like a moving shield. Its back plates have been the subject of endless debate. There were around 17 of them, arranged in 2 staggered rows that ran from its neck to the tip of its tail. Each plate was shaped like a large flat leaf or a kite, and some were nearly a metre tall. For years, scientists wondered what purpose these plates served. Were they used for protection, display, or temperature control? The truth may be a mix of all three. The plates were made of bone covered with a layer of skin, and they were filled with tiny blood vessels. That meant they could have helped regulate body temperature by releasing heat or absorbing sunlight, much like a modern elephant's ears. They might also have changed colour slightly as blood flowed through them, perhaps to signal other Stegosauruses or to scare predators. It is also possible that the plates made the dinosaur look much larger and more intimidating than it really was, helping it to avoid confrontation. Whatever their function, the plates added to its unmistakable appearance, making Stegosaurus one of the most easily recognised dinosaurs ever discovered. Despite its clumsy shape and small brain, Stegosaurus was not helpless. Fossil evidence suggests it lived in herds or small groups, which could have offered extra safety against predators. Travelling together would have made it harder for an attacker to single out one target. Young Stegosauruses may have stayed close to adults, using their bodies as protection. They likely communicated through low sounds or body movements, though not in any complex way. Their small brains meant their behaviour would have been basic, but that was enough for survival. The Stegosaurus had a small head, and its teeth were short and flat, designed for grinding plants rather than biting. It could not chew its food thoroughly, so it probably swallowed leaves and stems whole, relying on its large stomach to digest them. Inside that huge body, its gut would have worked like a slow-moving factory, breaking down tough vegetation with the help of bacteria. This process might have taken a long time, but with its calm lifestyle, the Stegosaurus had plenty of time to digest. It was built for endurance, not speed. In its environment, Stegosaurus shared its home with many other dinosaurs. There were long-necked sauropods like Apatosaurus and Diplodocus, massive creatures that could reach the tops of trees, and there were sharp-toothed predators like Allosaurus, who ruled the carnivore ranks. Compared to these animals, Stegosaurus was medium-sized, but it was one of the best protected. A full-grown Stegosaurus would have been a difficult and dangerous meal. Its thick hide, armoured plates, and spiked tail were a serious warning to any hunter thinking of attacking. Yet, even with those defences, life was dangerous. Young Stegosauruses were smaller and had softer plates that hardened as they grew, making them easy prey for smaller predators. The forests and plains were filled with threats, from fast-moving carnivorous dinosaurs to large flying reptiles that watched from above. The Stegosaurus had to stay alert, despite its slow reactions. It probably relied on its sharp senses of smell and hearing to detect danger before it was too late. When threatened, it could swing its tail in a deadly arc, using the long spikes to strike any attacker that came too close. Some scientists think that Stegosaurus could rear up slightly on its back legs when necessary, using its tail for balance. This would have allowed it to reach higher plants or deliver more powerful swings with its tail. The idea of such a heavy creature lifting itself like that may sound unlikely, but its strong hind limbs and flexible tail made it possible, at least for short moments. Even though Stegosaurus was not bright, it played an important role in its ecosystem. It helped shape its environment by eating large amounts of vegetation, which kept plant growth under control. It also spread seeds through its droppings, helping new plants grow in different areas. Like many herbivores, it was a vital link in the food chain, turning plants into energy that predators higher up the chain could rely on. In a way, its slow, simple life supported the entire prehistoric landscape around it. The fossil history of Stegosaurus is also fascinating. The first fossils were found in the late 19th century in the American West, during the famous Bone Wars, a time when rival paleontologists raced to discover and name new dinosaurs. The Stegosaurus was first described in 1877 by Othniel Charles Marsh, one of the leading scientists of that era. When he examined the strange bones, he was confused at first, thinking the plates might have lain flat on the dinosaur's back like shingles on a roof, which is where the name Stegosaurus, meaning roofed lizard, came from. Later discoveries showed that the plates stood upright instead, giving the animal its unique look. Since then, scientists have studied many Stegosaurus fossils, uncovering details about its structure, growth, and behaviour. There have been several species identified, such as Stegosaurus stenops and Stegosaurus ungulatus, differing slightly in size and plate shape. Some were larger, reaching nearly 10 meters in length, while others were smaller and lighter. Despite these variations, they all share the same general features: a small head, huge body, double row of plates and spiked tail. Over the years, artists and scientists alike have tried to imagine what Stegosaurus looked like in life. Early reconstructions made it seem clumsy and reptile-like, dragging its tail behind it and holding its body close to the ground. But newer studies suggest that it carried its tail high and walked more gracefully than once thought, with its back arched and plates shining in the sun. Its skin may have been covered with small scales, possibly with patches of colour or pattern that helped it blend into its surroundings or communicate with others of its kind. Some researchers have speculated that Stegosaurus could blush or change the colour of its plates by increasing blood flow through them, perhaps during mating displays or to scare enemies. This would have made the plates not only functional but also expressive, turning the dinosaur's back into a living display board. Such an ability would have required fine control over blood circulation, something its nervous system could handle even with a small brain. So while it may not have been capable of complex thought, its body might have had surprising ways to express itself. Even its walking pattern tells a story. The forelegs of Stegosaurus were shorter than its hind legs, giving it a sloping back and a slow, rocking gait. It could move steadily across the ground, but not quickly. Running away from predators was probably impossible, so standing its ground was its best defense. Fossilized footprints show that Stegosaurus walked with deliberate, heavy steps, leaving deep impressions in the ancient mud. Those tracks have survived for millions of years, silent records of a creature that once ruled the Jurassic Plains. Scientists continue to learn more about Stegosaurus using modern technology. CT scans of fossil skulls allow them to see the exact shape of the brain cavity, confirming just how small it was. Computer models of its tail show how it could swing with deadly precision. Studies of bone texture reveal how the plates grew and how blood might have circulated through them. Each new discovery helps paint a clearer picture of this bizarre yet beautiful animal. There is something almost endearing about Stegosaurus. Its mix of power and simplicity makes it stand out among dinosaurs. It was not smart, it was not fast, and it could not roar like a T-Rex or soar through the skies like a pterosaur, but it had its own form of majesty. Its back plates caught the sunlight, and its tail spikes gleamed like polished blades. It did not need cunning to survive. It needed patience, strength, and the quiet confidence of a creature perfectly designed for its world. Children often learn about Stegosaurus early when studying dinosaurs, and it quickly becomes a favourite because it looks so different from anything alive today. Its combination of spikes and plates seems almost like something from a fantasy story rather than real life, and yet every fossil bone proves that it was real, a living, breathing animal that once walked the earth. The thought that such a creature existed, with a brain smaller than a walnut yet capable of surviving for millions of years, shows that intelligence is not the only measure of success in nature. Even today, scientists debate just how limited its intelligence was. Some argue that a small brain does not always mean simple behaviour. The brain's shape and structure can matter more than its size alone. Birds, for example, have small brains compared to their bodies, yet some are remarkably clever. So perhaps Stegosaurus was not quite as dim-witted as it is often portrayed. It might have been slow, but that did not mean it was unaware. It could have had sharp senses and strong instincts, perfectly tuned to the dangers of its world. When we think about how it lived, it helps to picture the late Jurassic environment in full detail. The air was warm and humid, the land filled with lush vegetation. Giant dragonflies buzzed through the air, and herds of sauropods moved across the plains like living mountains. In the distance, volcanoes rumbled, spreading ash over the land and creating fertile soil. Streams and rivers wound their way through forests of cycads and ferns, providing water for all creatures. In that setting, Stegosaurus would have seemed almost peaceful, quietly feeding while its plates shimmered in the sun. At night, when predators prowled, it might have stood still and silent, its tail ready to strike. Its senses would have been alert to every sound and vibration. It did not need to plan or think deeply. Its instincts told it what to do. That simple, automatic way of living worked perfectly for millions of years. In the grand timeline of life, Stegosaurus was a great success story, even with its tiny brain. When scientists found the first Stegosaurus fossils, They realised they were dealing with something entirely new. No other dinosaur combined such heavy armour with such an unusual shape. Its discovery changed how paleontologists thought about the variety of dinosaur life. Its discovery changed how paleontologists thought about the variety of dinosaur life. It showed that evolution could create creatures that were both strange and specialised, each adapted perfectly to its role. The Stegosaurus was slow, but it was a survivor, part of an ancient balance that lasted until changing climates and new species took over. Even after so many millions of years, its legacy lives on. Museums around the world display its skeletons, and children stare up in awe at the rows of plates stretching down its spine. Artists paint it standing proudly in prehistoric forests, sunlight gleaming off its armour. Paleontologists continue to study it, uncovering new fossils and new insights. Each discovery reminds us how much we still have to learn about the creatures that once dominated our planet. The Stegosaurus remains a symbol of prehistoric life. Its brain may have been small, but its body was an engineering marvel, its defences brilliant in their simplicity. Nature shaped it not for thought, but for survival, and in that task, it succeeded completely. Even with the mind of a walnut, it managed to thrive in a world full of giants and predators. Its story proves that sometimes being strong, tough, and well-armed can be just as effective as being smart. Across the vast sweep of time, the Stegosaurus still captures human imagination. Its skeleton tells a story that words alone cannot, of a creature that lived long before humans, in a world both alien and beautiful. Its plates once caught the warmth of the Jurassic sun, and its tail once swung with unstoppable force. Beneath that armour beat a simple but steady life, driven by the most basic instincts: to eat, to live, and to survive. Though its brain was small, its presence in history is enormous, standing as one of the greatest and most fascinating examples of life's strange creativity. During the last days of the dinosaurs, when huge creatures roamed the earth and the land was covered in warm forests, there existed one of the strangest and most heavily protected animals ever known, the Ankylosaurus. This dinosaur looked more like a living tank than a typical reptile. It was covered from head to tail in hard plates of bone, and had a massive tail club strong enough to break bones. Yet, behind all that armour, this creature was not very bright. Its small brain and slow movements made it one of the least intelligent dinosaurs of its age. Despite its fierce appearance, it was more likely to spend its time quietly chewing plants than doing anything else. The Ankylosaurus lived around 66 million years ago, near the end of the Cretaceous period. It shared the land with famous giants like Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops. Fossils of Ankylosaurus have been found in North America, mainly in places that were once lush plains and forests. During that time, the western part of what is now North America was part of a landmass called Laramedia, separated from the eastern part by an inland sea. The environment was full of low-growing plants, ferns, and shrubs, the perfect kind of food for a large plant-eating animal that stayed close to the ground. Ankylosaurus was enormous. It could reach lengths of nearly 30 feet, stand about 5 to 6 feet tall, and weigh around 6 tons, roughly the same as an elephant. Its body was wide, low, and heavily built. Along its back and sides were thick bony plates called osteoderms, which acted like armour. These plates were often covered by a tough layer of keratin, the same material found in human fingernails and animal horns. Between the plates were smaller knobs and spikes that protected even the softest parts of its body. Its head was low and triangular, with 2 horns pointing backward from the skull and smaller bumps above the eyes. Altogether, the creature looked like a walking fortress. The most remarkable part of Ankylosaurus was its tail. The last few vertebrae of the tail were fused together, forming a stiff handle that supported a large club of bone at the end. Scientists believe this tail club could deliver a powerful blow strong enough to crush the bones of an attacking predator. When a Tyrannosaurus or another meat-eater tried to bite from behind, Ankylosaurus could swing its tail with enormous force. Some studies suggest that the impact from the club could reach several thousand newtons of force, enough to break legs or ribs of large predators. However, because of its heavy body and short legs, Ankylosaurus was slow-moving, and its best strategy was to stay still or crouch low to the ground, relying on its armour to keep it safe. Although the Ankylosaurus looked like it was built for battle, its lifestyle was anything but aggressive. It was a peaceful plant-eater that spent most of its time searching for food. Its mouth was small, with a beak at the front for nipping leaves and stems. Unlike other plant eaters that could reach high vegetation, Ankylosaurus fed on low-lying plants, likely ferns, cycads, and angiosperms, the early flowering plants that were becoming common during that period. Its teeth were small and shaped like simple leaf blades, suited for slicing rather than chewing. It probably swallowed tough plants whole, letting its large digestive system do the rest. Inside its massive body, fermentation would break down the plant fibers, producing the energy it needed to survive. Scientists have long been fascinated by how such a creature managed to live in a dangerous world filled with predators. Despite being heavily armed, Ankylosaurus was not a fighter by nature. Its brain was small compared to its body size, only about the size of a walnut, and studies of its skull show that its senses were not very advanced. It could probably smell reasonably well and see moderately in daylight, but it was not particularly alert or quick to react. It likely depended more on instinct than intelligence. When threatened, it may have simply frozen in place or swung its tail blindly, without much strategy. Ankylosaurus was part of a larger family of armoured dinosaurs known as Ankylosauridae. These dinosaurs appeared millions of years before the end of the Cretaceous and had spread across much of the ancient world. Relatives of Ankylosaurus lived in places as far away as Asia and Europe. Some, like the smaller Euoplocephalus from Canada or the Chinese species Pachycephalosaurus, shared similar features such as body armour and tail clubs. However, Ankylosaurus itself was the largest and most heavily armoured of them all. Its design represented the peak of this group's evolution, a creature perfectly built for defence but not for speed or intelligence. Paleontologists who have studied Ankylosaurus fossils have discovered that its armour was more complex than once thought. The plates were not uniform, they varied in size, shape and placement. The ones along its back were large and flat, forming an almost continuous shield, while those on its sides were smaller and shaped like spikes, possibly to make it harder for predators to get a grip. The skin beneath these plates was thick and tough, and the spaces between them may have allowed some flexibility when the animal moved. Even the eyelids might have had protective coverings, giving the dinosaur one of the most complete natural defences ever evolved. Despite its heavy build, Ankylosaurus could move, though not quickly. Its legs were short but strong, and its feet were broad to support its weight. Fossil trackways from similar armoured dinosaurs show that they walked with a slow, deliberate gait, keeping their bellies close to the ground. Some scientists believe Ankylosaurus may have spent much of its time in open areas, where it could spot predators from a distance and avoid dense forests that might slow its movements further. Still, even if it could not outrun danger, it was almost impossible to injure, a walking shield of bone and muscle. The environment in which Ankylosaurus lived was full of challenges. The late Cretaceous landscape of western North America was warm and humid, with frequent changes in sea level that created a mix of coastal plains, swamps and forests. Huge herbivores like Triceratops, Edmontosaurus and Pachycephalosaurus also lived there, feeding on the same plants. Predators such as Tyrannosaurus rex, Daspletosaurus and Dromaeosaurus hunted these creatures, making the world a dangerous place. In this setting, the Ankylosaurus's armour and tail club were its greatest advantages, the tools that let it survive among deadly neighbours. Fossils of Ankylosaurus are rare compared to those of other dinosaurs, which makes it even more fascinating. Most discoveries come from the Hell Creek Formation and Lance Formation, ancient rock layers that have also yielded fossils of T-Rex and Triceratops. The first Ankylosaurus fossils were found in the early 20th century by American paleontologist Barnum Brown, who also discovered the first Tyrannosaurus rex skeleton. Brown's discovery of Ankylosaurus included parts of the skull, armour plates, and tailbones, enough to show that it was a new kind of armoured dinosaur. The name Ankylosaurus comes from Greek words meaning fused lizard, referring to the way its bones and armour plates were joined tightly together. Even with all that protection, life for Ankylosaurus was not easy. Its slow speed made it vulnerable when caught in open areas, especially if a predator managed to surprise it from the side or rear. Scientists think that if a T. rex managed to flip one over, the soft underbelly would have been exposed, a weakness in its otherwise perfect defence. But flipping such a massive creature would not have been easy. A fully grown Ankylosaurus was likely too heavy for even a powerful predator to lift. Therefore, most predators may have preferred easier prey, leaving the armoured dinosaur alone unless they were desperate. One mystery that still puzzles scientists is how Ankylosaurus used its tail club in real life. While it was clearly built for striking, there is little evidence that these dinosaurs actually fought often. Some scientists suggest the tail was used mainly for defense, while others think males might have used it in fights with each other during mating season. Injuries found on fossils of related species hint that these tail clubs might sometimes have been used in combat between individuals. However, because Ankylosaurus fossils are incomplete, it is hard to say for certain. The slow and simple nature of Ankylosaurus extended beyond its movements. Its brain case shows that it had limited capacity for problem-solving or complex behaviour. It probably lived alone or in small groups, moving slowly from place to place in search of food. It might have relied on memory to return to safe feeding spots or watering holes, but it was not capable of much more than that. Its hearing and smell may have been its strongest senses, helping it detect predators or other members of its kind nearby. Visual studies of its skull suggest that its eyes face somewhat to the sides, giving it a wide view of its surroundings, another helpful feature for spotting danger. In the grand story of dinosaur evolution, Ankylosaurus represents the idea of defense taken to the extreme. Where other dinosaurs evolved horns, speed, or size to survive, this one relied entirely on armor. Over millions of years, its ancestors became slower but better protected, until they reached the peak of armored design. Yet this very design came at a cost. With so much of its body weight devoted to armor and a large digestive system, Ankylosaurus had little room left for a big brain or quick muscles. It was the ultimate survivor, but not an adaptable one. When the environment changed or when new threats arose, it was not quick enough to respond. When the Great Extinction Event struck about 66 million years ago, triggered by an asteroid impact and massive volcanic eruptions, Ankylosaurus disappeared along with nearly all other non-avian dinosaurs. Its heavy armor could not protect it from the environmental chaos that followed. The skies filled with dust and ash, blocking sunlight and cooling the planet. Plants died, food became scarce, and large plant eaters like Ankylosaurus could no longer survive. Fossils of the species end right at the boundary that marks the extinction, showing that it vanished along with the rest of its world. Even though it was slow and not very smart, Ankylosaurus remains one of the most remarkable animals in history. Its body tells a story of evolution shaped by danger and defense. Every part of it, from the fused bones of its skull to the massive tail club, was built for survival. And while it may not have been clever, it was successful enough to thrive for millions of years before its time came to an end. In many ways, it shows that intelligence is not always the key to survival. Sometimes, strength and patience are enough. Modern paleontologists have learned much about Ankylosaurus by studying not just its bones, but also its relatives. For example, the species Euoplocephalus, found in slightly older rocks, provides clues about how Ankylosaurus might have looked in life. Both had broad bodies, low stances, and similar armor patterns, though Ankylosaurus was larger and had a different skull shape. Computer models and biomechanical studies have even attempted to simulate how its tail moved, showing that the tail could swing like a baseball bat, powered by strong muscles in the hips and tail base. Such research helps bring this ancient creature to life in ways that early scientists could only dream of. There are also theories about its behavior during different seasons. Some scientists think Ankylosaurus may have migrated short distances in search of better food or climate conditions. Others believe it stayed in one region year-round, feeding on the abundant low plants that grew there. The broad shape of its body may have allowed it to keep its centre of gravity low, which would have helped it move steadily even on uneven ground. Its nostrils and air passages were large, possibly helping it cool down or filter dust from the air, a useful feature in dry, dusty environments. Although it lacked intelligence, Ankylosaurus had evolved to perfection for its way of life. It did not need to chase prey or plan ahead. Its world was one of slow rhythms, days spent grazing, resting, and occasionally defending itself. This simplicity made it one of the longest-lasting and most successful herbivores of its kind. While faster or more intelligent dinosaurs might have lived shorter, more dangerous lives, Ankylosaurus lived securely behind its armor, trusting in the strength that nature had given it. Scientists studying its fossils continue to uncover details about how its armor grew and developed. Some studies suggest that the bony plates formed early in life and grew larger as the dinosaur matured. Younger individuals may have had softer, smaller plates that hardened over time. This means that even the juveniles had some level of protection from an early age. Fossilized skin impressions from related species show that the spaces between the plates were covered in rough, pebbly scales, adding yet another layer of defense. No predator could easily bite through such a combination of armor and skin. It is fascinating to imagine how this slow, armored creature moved through its ancient world. Herds of duck-billed dinosaurs may have grazed nearby, while Triceratops wandered through the same plains. Above, pterosaurs soared, and small feathered dinosaurs darted between trees. In this busy landscape, Ankylosaurus would have stood out as a low, wide figure, glinting in the sunlight as it shuffled through the ferns. It may have had a dull greyish-brown colour that helped it blend with the ground, providing camouflage against predators. Its only real weakness was its slowness, but since few predators could bite through its armour, this was rarely a problem. Over the years, Ankylosaurus has become a favourite among dinosaur enthusiasts and paleontologists alike. Its unique body structure has inspired comparisons to modern animals such as armadillos, turtles, and crocodiles. However, unlike these creatures, Ankylosaurus had no ability to hide underground or in water. Its defense was purely physical. It stood its ground and trusted its armor to protect it. This remarkable strategy worked well for millions of years, showing how evolution can create different paths to survival. Although it might seem that a creature so slow and simple could not thrive, Ankylosaurus defied that idea. It lived through harsh climates, survived among deadly predators, and flourished across wide areas of ancient North America. It represents a form of life that found safety not in intelligence or agility, but in sheer resilience. Every fossil of Ankylosaurus tells a story of endurance, of an animal that relied on its shell-like armor to face a violent and unpredictable world. If one were to walk beside an Ankylosaurus, the ground would likely tremble slightly with each step it took. Its heavy feet would press into the soil, leaving wide footprints that could last until fossilized. Its head, low to the ground, would move side to side as it grazed on ferns, its beak clipping plants efficiently. It might stop occasionally, raise its head slightly, and sniff the air for danger. When the shadow of a predator appeared, it would not run. Instead, it would tighten its body, swing its tail into position, and prepare to strike. That single swing, driven by muscles and bones evolved over millions of years, could decide whether it lived or died. Ankylosaurus remains a powerful symbol of nature's creativity. It shows how life can take many different forms to face challenges. While it may not have been clever or quick, it was one of the best protected creatures ever to walk the earth. Its slow, steady existence reminds us that survival is not always about brains or speed, but sometimes about patience, strength, and the quiet confidence of knowing that nothing can easily harm you. Standing among the ancient giants that once ruled the planet, Sauroposeidon towered like a living skyscraper. It was one of the tallest creatures to ever walk the earth, a true colossus from the early Cretaceous period, around 112 million years ago. This enormous dinosaur lived in what is now the southern part of North America, especially in regions that today include Oklahoma, Texas, and parts of Wyoming. Its name means Earthquake God Lizard, a title that perfectly matched its size and the ground-shaking impression it must have made when it moved. Sauroposeidon belonged to a group of long-necked herbivorous dinosaurs known as sauropods, animals famous for their pillar-like legs, whip-like tails, and incredibly long necks. But even among sauropods, Sauroposeidon stood out as something extraordinary, reaching heights that may have rivaled or even surpassed any other land animal known to science. Fossil evidence suggests that Sauroposeidon could have reached a height of about 60 feet when its neck was fully raised, roughly equal to a 6-story building, and stretched nearly 110 feet from head to tail. Its weight was estimated to be between 60 and 70 tons, about the same as 10 fully grown African elephants. Despite its enormous body, Sauroposeidon had a surprisingly small head, barely large enough to fit into the mouth of a crocodile. The skull was lightweight and full of air spaces to reduce its mass, allowing the animal to balance its long neck without collapsing under its own weight. The tiny head housed an equally small brain, one that weighed only a few kilograms at most, meaning that this towering giant, despite its intimidating presence, was far from intelligent by human standards. Its brain was located at the end of a neck that may have been over 35 feet long, so the distance between the brain and parts of its body was extreme, Scientists believe it might have taken several seconds for nerve signals to travel from its tail or feet up to its brain and back. This delay meant that Sauroposeidon reacted slowly to stimuli. For example, if something touched its tail, it would take a noticeable amount of time before the brain even registered the contact, and even longer before the dinosaur could respond. Because of this, Sauroposeidon likely relied more on its size and bulk for defense rather than speed or quick thinking. Its immense body was nearly invincible to most predators of its time, and very few carnivores would have dared to attack such a towering creature. The fossils of Sauroposeidon were first discovered in the late 20th century. In 1994, a team of paleontologists found a set of unusually long vertebrae in Oklahoma. These neck bones were enormous, each one measuring up to 4 feet in length. At first, scientists thought they belonged to a massive tree trunk or another type of animal, but careful study revealed that they were part of a gigantic sauropod. Later analysis confirmed that these bones represented a new genus and species of dinosaur, which was officially named Sauroposeidon protolis in the year 2000. The discovery caused great excitement because it extended the known record of giant sauropods into the early Cretaceous period, long after many other sauropods had disappeared. What made Sauroposeidon particularly interesting was how its body was built to handle such an extreme size. Its neck vertebrae were hollowed out by air sacs, a feature called pneumaticity, which made them both strong and light, much like the structure of modern bird bones. These air sacs were connected to the dinosaur's respiratory system, allowing it to breathe efficiently and manage its enormous oxygen needs. Scientists think this system was similar to that of modern birds, where air flows in one direction through the lungs, making breathing continuous and effective. Without such adaptations, Sauroposeidon might not have been able to supply enough oxygen to its massive body, especially since air had to travel up and down that incredibly long neck. The neck of Sauroposeidon was not only long, but also flexible enough to reach high into the treetops. It could probably browse on vegetation that was completely out of reach for other herbivores, giving it a huge advantage in its ecosystem. It likely fed on the upper branches of conifers, cycads, and early flowering plants that were beginning to spread during the Cretaceous. Its peg-like teeth were not designed for chewing, but for stripping leaves from branches. Once swallowed, the plant matter was broken down in its enormous gut through fermentation, much like how modern herbivores such as cows and elephants digest their food. The stomach and intestines of Sauroposeidon were vast and may have occupied much of its body cavity, constantly processing vegetation to sustain its gigantic frame. Its legs were built like tree trunks, thick, sturdy and straight, supporting the tremendous weight above. The feet had large, cushioned pads that helped distribute the pressure of its enormous mass and prevent injury while walking across soft ground. Like other sauropods, Sauroposeidon probably moved slowly and deliberately, with a long stride that allowed it to cover distance without expending too much energy. Its gait may have been somewhat elephant-like, with each step creating a deep impression in the mud that could later fossilize into trackways. Some fossilized footprints found in Texas and Oklahoma may indeed belong to Sauroposeidon or its close relatives, showing lines of large circular prints that stretch across prehistoric floodplains. Sauroposeidon lived during a time when the Earth's environment was changing. Around 112 million years ago, during the early Cretaceous period, much of North America was warm and humid, with vast floodplains, coastal swamps, and forests of tall conifer trees. The region that is now Oklahoma and Texas was part of a lush landscape that supported many species of dinosaurs, including large predators like Acrocanthosaurus, a powerful carnivorous dinosaur that may have been one of Sauroposeidon's few potential threats. However, even Acrocanthosaurus, which stood about 12 feet tall and stretched over 35 feet long, would have been dwarfed by the towering sauropod. Most likely, Sauroposeidon's massive size alone was enough to discourage attacks, as one swing of its tail could break bones or crush anything that came too close. Despite its immense strength, Sauroposeidon was a slow-moving and probably gentle creature. It would have spent most of its time feeding and walking between patches of forest in search of fresh vegetation. Because it needed a huge amount of food each day, possibly several hundred kilograms of leaves and branches, it likely moved constantly, much like modern elephants do, to avoid exhausting the vegetation in one area. Some scientists suggest that Sauroposeidon may have lived in herds, possibly for protection or social reasons, though there is limited direct evidence. Living in groups would have made sense, as sauropods often left behind trackways showing multiple individuals travelling together, suggesting at least some level of herd behaviour. The slow communication between its brain and body would have influenced nearly every part of Sauroposeidon's life. Because it took several seconds for nerve signals to reach distant parts of its body, its movements were probably deliberate and careful. A quick reaction to danger would have been almost impossible. If a predator attacked its tail, by the time the brain registered the pain, the situation could already have changed. This slow response time was due to the immense length of its spinal cord, where signals had to travel at limited speeds through nerve cells. Scientists have calculated that in such large animals, it could take up to half a second or more for signals to go from the tail to the brain. That might not sound like much, but for a creature depending on coordination across a body more than 100 feet long, it made a significant difference. To help compensate for this delay, some researchers believe that Sauroposeidon, like other large sauropods, may have had secondary nerve centres along its spine, especially near the hips and tail. These clusters of nerve cells, sometimes called spinal brains, could handle simple reflexes without waiting for signals to reach the main brain. For example, if the tail or leg was touched or injured, these lower nerve centres might automatically trigger movement or muscle contraction without involving the brain. This system would have made the animal more efficient and responsive, even with its slow overall nervous system. While its brain was small compared to its body, it was still well adapted for its needs. Sauroposeidon did not require problem-solving intelligence or complex hunting strategies. Its life revolved around feeding, moving and surviving, all of which required reliable instinct rather than thought. The small brain was sufficient to handle balance, movement and basic sensory processing. Its eyes, positioned on the sides of its small head, provided a wide field of view, allowing it to see predators approaching from different angles. Its sense of smell was likely modest, and its hearing might have been tuned to low frequencies, useful for detecting distant sounds or communication between individuals across long distances. The discovery of Sauroposeidon also helped scientists understand more about the evolution of sauropods. It appears to have been closely related to another group called Brachiosaurids, which included Brachiosaurus and Giraffatitan. Like these dinosaurs, Sauroposeidon had longer front legs than hind legs, which tilted its body upward and allowed it to raise its neck high into the air. This posture was ideal for feeding from tall trees. Its body shape, with a gently sloping back and elongated neck, would have given it an elegant appearance despite its massive bulk. The long front limbs also meant that Sauroposeidon probably spent most of its time feeding on high vegetation, rather than grazing near the ground. Comparisons between Sauroposeidon and Brachiosaurus suggest that Sauroposeidon was essentially an even taller, more extreme version of its famous relative. Some paleontologists believe that if the two species were placed side by side, Sauroposeidon's head might have reached several feet higher. However, because only partial fossils of Sauroposeidon have been found, including a few neck bones and parts of the shoulder region, scientists must rely on comparisons and scaling to estimate its full size. Even with limited remains, the evidence strongly supports its title as one of the tallest, if not the tallest, dinosaurs ever known. The environment Sauroposeidon lived in was full of other fascinating creatures. Alongside it lived ornithopods, small herbivores that likely moved in herds and fed on lower vegetation. There were also armoured dinosaurs called Ankylosaurs that protected themselves with bony plates, and various flying reptiles that soared above the warm wetlands. Crocodile-like reptiles and turtles lived in the waterways, while early mammals scurried through the undergrowth. It was a world still dominated by dinosaurs, but one already showing signs of change. Flowering plants were beginning to spread, reshaping the diets of herbivores and paving the way for new ecosystems. Because Sauroposeidon's neck bones were so long and light, they were often preserved in fragments, making it difficult for scientists to reconstruct the entire skeleton. The fossils found in Oklahoma came from a river floodplain, suggesting that when the dinosaur died, its body may have been washed into a river and buried by sediments. Over millions of years, these sediments turned into rock, preserving the bones until their discovery. Further fossils believed to belong to the same or similar species were later found in Texas, helping paleontologists piece together more information about its anatomy and distribution. These discoveries confirmed that Sauroposeidon was widespread across what was then the western interior of North America. Its diet was another area of scientific interest. Based on the structure of its teeth and jaws, it likely fed on soft leaves and branches rather than tough, fibrous plants. Its teeth were narrow and spoon-shaped, designed for stripping foliage. Once the vegetation entered its mouth, it would be swallowed almost whole. Sauroposeidon probably used its long neck to reach different heights without having to move its massive body much, conserving energy. By sweeping its head from side to side, it could clear large areas of foliage efficiently. This feeding strategy meant it could dominate high-level vegetation, while other herbivores fed on the lower levels, reducing competition and allowing multiple species to coexist in the same environment. Scientists also believe that Sauroposeidon's enormous size helped it regulate its body temperature. Its massive body would have warmed slowly and cooled slowly, maintaining a fairly stable internal temperature, a condition known as gigantothermy. This would have been beneficial in the warm Cretaceous climate, allowing it to function efficiently without overheating or losing too much heat at night. Its large size also made it less vulnerable to predators, as few carnivores could inflict serious harm on an animal so gigantic. Reproduction in Sauroposeidon would have followed the same general pattern as other sauropods. It likely laid eggs in nests dug into the ground, possibly covering them with vegetation to protect them. The eggs themselves would have been relatively small compared to the adult size, perhaps about the size of a soccer ball, since larger eggs would risk collapsing under their own weight. The young sauropods that hatched would have been tiny compared to their parents, and extremely vulnerable. They probably grew rapidly, feeding constantly to reach a safer size. Fossil evidence from other sauropods shows that they might have reached adult size in just a few decades, growing several tons each year during their youth. The sheer scale of Sauroposeidon continues to fascinate scientists and the public alike. When trying to visualize it, one can think of a creature taller than a modern giraffe by nearly 3 times, with a neck so long that it could look into the windows of a 10-meter high building. Standing beside such a dinosaur would have been an awe-inspiring sight, as it towered silently above the landscape, pulling leaves from treetops that no other animal could reach. Its slow movements and immense size would have made it seem almost like a moving hill, each step causing the ground to tremble faintly beneath its weight. While it may not have been the most intelligent dinosaur, Sauroposeidon did not need cleverness to thrive. Evolution had given it other advantages: strength, size, and an ability to feed in places no other creature could. Its small brain was enough to control its huge body, and though it may have taken seconds for its tail to feel something and its brain to respond, that delay did not matter much in a world where few creatures dared to challenge it. For millions of years it ruled the forests and floodplains of its time with quiet dominance, living proof that survival does not always depend on speed or intelligence, but sometimes on sheer physical power and adaptation to one's environment. Even in death, Sauroposeidon left behind a story that stretched across eons. The bones it left behind, buried and turned to stone, waited patiently for over 100 million years before being discovered. When scientists uncovered them, they revealed not only the shape of a creature but a glimpse into a vanished world. A world where giants like Sauroposeidon walked beneath towering trees and breathed the warm air of a prehistoric Earth. Its fossils continue to teach researchers about the limits of size and structure in living creatures, helping us understand how life adapts to reach extraordinary extremes. Though its brain was small and its thoughts simple, Sauroposeidon's legacy is enormous, a reminder that even the slowest, least intelligent creatures can become legends of the natural world. There was once a creature so massive that its footsteps could shake the ground beneath it, yet inside its enormous skull rested a brain that was barely the size of a small fruit. This was the Apatosaurus, known to many people by another familiar name, the Brontosaurus. For years, scientists argued over whether these two names belonged to the same animal or two different ones, and for a long time, museums labelled it Brontosaurus. Only in later research did paleontologists discover that the bones once thought to be of two separate species actually belonged to the same kind of dinosaur. Yet the name Brontosaurus, meaning thunder lizard, became so popular that it still lives on in books, movies, and people's memories. This enormous plant-eating dinosaur lived roughly between 152 and 145 million years ago during the late Jurassic period, a time when gigantic creatures ruled the Earth and lush green forests stretched across what are now dry deserts. Apatosaurus belonged to a group of dinosaurs called sauropods, the long-necked, long-tailed plant-eaters that towered over their prehistoric surroundings. These creatures were the skyscrapers of the dinosaur world, often reaching heights that rivaled modern buildings. An adult Apatosaurus could grow up to 75 feet long from nose to tail and could weigh as much as 25 to 30 tons. That means it was about as long as 2 city buses parked end to end and as heavy as several elephants combined. Despite its gigantic size, its brain was astonishingly small, roughly the size of a large walnut or a small orange. This tiny brain was not capable of much complex thought. The animal most likely relied on instinct more than intelligence, performing basic behaviours like eating, walking, and defending itself without much awareness or planning. The world Apatosaurus lived in was warm and full of green plants. The continents had not yet taken the shapes we know today. North America, where Apatosaurus fossils have been found in places like Wyoming, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Utah, looked very different in those days. Instead of dry plains and red rocks, it was a land filled with lush vegetation, ferns, and conifer trees. Rivers ran through wide floodplains, and swamps were common. The Apatosaurus spent much of its time wandering through these green landscapes, eating enormous amounts of plants every day to keep its huge body fed. Its long neck allowed it to reach vegetation that other animals could not, either pulling down branches from tall trees or sweeping its head from side to side to strip leaves from low plants. Because of its slow-moving body and simple brain, the Apatosaurus likely did not do much more than eat, move, and rest. Its large body meant that it needed huge quantities of food to survive, and it may have spent most of its day feeding, much like modern elephants. Scientists estimate that an adult Apatosaurus might have eaten up to 800 pounds of plants daily. This diet included ferns, cycads, and conifers, which were common during the Jurassic period. The teeth of Apatosaurus were shaped like spoons, broad and flat, perfect for pulling leaves off branches but not for chewing. Instead of chewing its food, it probably swallowed the plant material whole and relied on its large stomach and gut to break down the tough fibers. The Apatosaurus moved slowly but steadily, supported by 4 thick pillar-like legs. These legs were strong enough to carry its enormous weight and keep it balanced while walking. Each foot had a set of large, rounded toes, and its front feet were smaller than its back ones. Its long neck, which could stretch up to 20 feet in length, was made up of thick, heavy bones, and its tail was long and whip-like, possibly measuring up to 50 feet. Some scientists believe that the tail could have been used as a defensive weapon. By swinging it quickly, Apatosaurus might have been able to create a cracking sound similar to a whip, which could scare off predators or even deliver painful blows to attackers like Allosaurus, one of the main predators of that era. Despite its massive size, Apatosaurus was not a predator. It had no claws, sharp teeth, or hunting instincts. Instead, its size was its main defense. Few carnivorous dinosaurs would dare to attack such a gigantic creature unless it was old, sick, or very young. Still, its small brain suggests that it was not very aware of danger or strategy. It probably depended on its natural size, herd behaviour, and instincts to survive. Fossil evidence suggests that many sauropods, including Apatosaurus, may have lived in herds. Living in groups would have offered some protection against predators and made it easier to find food and water. One of the most interesting facts about Apatosaurus is how long it took for nerve signals to travel through its body. The distance from its head to the tip of its tail could be over 70 feet. When the animal stepped on something or felt pain in its tail, the signal would take a noticeable amount of time, perhaps several seconds, to reach its brain. That means that if something bit its tail, it might not even realize it immediately. To deal with this delay, scientists once believed that Apatosaurus might have had a second brain-like nerve center in its hips, which could help control the movement of its tail and back legs more quickly. Although this idea is not supported by modern research, it shows how unusual this animal's nervous system must have been given its size. The neck of Apatosaurus has also been a topic of debate among scientists. Some early researchers thought that sauropods like Apatosaurus could lift their necks high like giraffes and feed from tall trees. Later studies, however, suggested that their necks were not as flexible as once thought. Instead, Apatosaurus may have held its neck mostly horizontally, sweeping it from side to side to feed on low and mid-level vegetation. This would have allowed it to cover large areas of plants without moving its whole body, which would save energy. Because such a large animal needed to conserve energy, even simple movements were important to its survival. The skull of Apatosaurus was relatively small compared to its body, and for many years paleontologists had difficulty finding the correct skull to match its skeleton. Early reconstructions mistakenly placed the skull of a different dinosaur called Camarasaurus on Apatosaurus skeletons in museums. This error lasted for decades until scientists found a true Apatosaurus skull in the early 20th century. The real skull turned out to be longer and narrower, with a shape that was more like that of Diplodocus, another famous long-necked dinosaur. This discovery corrected one of the most famous mix-ups in paleontology and helped researchers better understand how Apatosaurus looked and fed. Apatosaurus eggs and young have not been found as frequently as adult fossils, but based on related species, scientists think that the eggs were not very large, perhaps only a foot long. The babies that hatched from them were tiny compared to adults, weighing only a few pounds at birth. They must have grown very quickly, reaching their massive adult size in perhaps a few decades. Rapid growth would have been important for survival, helping them avoid predators and reach a size where few animals could threaten them. The environment of the late Jurassic period was a world filled with giants. Alongside Apatosaurus lived other enormous sauropods such as Diplodocus, Camarasaurus, and Brachiosaurus. Carnivorous dinosaurs like Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus hunted in the same regions. There were also smaller creatures like early mammals, lizards, and flying reptiles called pterosaurs that glided through the sky. The vegetation was dense, and the air contained more carbon dioxide than today, allowing plants to grow thick and tall. It was a warm and humid age, perfect for sustaining massive plant eaters like Apatosaurus that depended on endless amounts of greenery. Fossils of Apatosaurus are among the most complete sauropod remains ever discovered. The first Apatosaurus fossils were found in the year 1877 by the American paleontologist Othniel Charles Marsh in the Morrison Formation, a famous rock layer in the western United States. During the late 19th century, Marsh and his rival Edward Drinker Cope were locked in a fierce scientific competition known as the Bone Wars, where each tried to outdo the other in discovering new dinosaur species. In his rush to name new finds, Marsh accidentally created confusion by naming one skeleton Apatosaurus and another similar one Brontosaurus just 2 years later, in 1879. It was only decades later that scientists realized the two skeletons belonged to the same type of dinosaur, and the older name, Apatosaurus, had priority according to scientific naming rules. Still, Brontosaurus, with its meaning of thunder lizard, became a name that captured the public's imagination, a fitting title for such a majestic and powerful creature. Modern research using advanced computer models and CT scans has given scientists new insights into how Apatosaurus lived and moved. Studies of its bone structure suggest that its neck was supported by strong muscles and ligaments, allowing it to hold its head steady while walking. Its tail, long and flexible, could have been used for balance or even communication, perhaps making sounds or signals within a herd. Some scientists think that the sound of the whip-like tail could have reached the speed of sound, creating a loud crack that might have echoed across the Jurassic landscape. The internal structure of Apatosaurus bones also reveals much about its growth. Like the rings of a tree, bones show lines of growth that can tell scientists how fast an animal grew. Apatosaurus appears to have grown extremely rapidly, especially in its early years. This rapid growth would have required a constant supply of food and an efficient digestive system. Some paleontologists believe that sauropods had a kind of fermentation chamber in their gut, filled with bacteria that help break down tough plant materials, similar to the way cows digest grass today. Because Apatosaurus was so large, it likely had a very slow heartbeat compared to smaller animals, but it still needed to pump blood through its long neck up to its brain. Scientists have long debated how it managed this without collapsing from low blood pressure. Some suggest that Apatosaurus may have had a very powerful heart, possibly weighing several hundred pounds, to maintain blood flow to its head. Others think it might have held its neck mostly level with its body, which would reduce the effort needed for circulation. Either way, its massive circulatory system was a marvel of prehistoric biology, keeping the animal's organs working in perfect balance despite its size. Life for an Apatosaurus was probably simple but not easy. Its size protected it from many dangers, but it also limited its speed and flexibility. Moving from one feeding area to another would have been slow, and crossing rivers or swamps might have been challenging for such a heavy animal. Some early scientists believed that sauropods like Apatosaurus lived mostly in water to support their weight, but later studies showed that their bones were too dense for that. They were clearly land animals, although they might have waded through shallow rivers in search of plants. Their footprints, preserved in fossilized mud, show large, round impressions, sometimes in groups, which supports the idea that they move together in herds. The lifespan of an Apatosaurus might have been very long, possibly reaching up to 100 years. With few predators capable of killing a full-grown adult, and a body built for endurance rather than speed, it could have lived a slow, peaceful life. However, it would have faced natural challenges such as droughts, disease, and competition for food. During dry seasons, entire herds may have been forced to migrate long distances in search of water and greenery. Such migrations would have been a grand sight. Dozens of massive creatures moving together, shaking the ground with every step, their long necks swaying above the treetops. The fossils of Apatosaurus give scientists not only physical details, but also clues about how it interacted with its environment. The Morrison Formation, where its bones are found, contains not only dinosaur fossils, but also remains of plants, freshwater animals, and even fossilized pollen. These details help researchers rebuild the ancient ecosystems that Apatosaurus lived in. The presence of other sauropods alongside Apatosaurus suggests that they might have occupied slightly different feeding levels, some eating from low plants, others from mid-level or higher trees, allowing them to share the same environment without competing too much for the same food. Over time, the legacy of Apatosaurus has grown beyond scientific study. It has become one of the most recognized dinosaurs in the world, appearing in textbooks, toys, and movies. Even though its brain was tiny and its intelligence was limited, there is something fascinating about this enormous, gentle creature that once roamed the earth. Its sheer size captures the imagination, a reminder of how different life was millions of years ago when instinct ruled more than thought, and survival depended on simple behaviors rather than cleverness. While Apatosaurus may not have been smart by any measure, its instincts were perfectly suited for its way of life. Its body was designed for what it needed, reaching plants, digesting them, and moving through its environment without wasting energy. Nature gave it the tools to survive for millions of years, and that in itself is a kind of success. For an animal with a brain smaller than that of a modern house cat, it thrived for far longer than many species ever do. Its fossils stand as proof that intelligence is not always what determines survival. Sometimes strength, size, and instinct are enough. The tiny brain of Apatosaurus, sitting far from the rest of its massive body, might make it seem foolish or simple-minded, but it was part of a biological system that worked. Its senses were likely not very sharp, but it did not need them to hunt or navigate complex surroundings. It lived in open plains and forests where its size made it easy to find food and avoid predators. Its hearing might have been tuned to low-frequency sounds, which could travel long distances and help it communicate with other members of its herd. In a way, Apatosaurus lived in a slow-motion world, where everything happened at a pace suited to its gigantic body, a calm and steady rhythm of movement, feeding and resting. The discovery and study of Apatosaurus have also helped scientists understand more about evolution, growth, and anatomy in giant animals. By comparing its bones to those of other sauropods, researchers have pieced together how these giants adapted to their environment, how their skeletons supported such weight, and how they evolved over time. The fact that Apatosaurus bones have been found in multiple layers of rock shows that these dinosaurs lived for a very long period, several million years, and that they were successful in their environment until conditions changed. Volcanic activity, shifting climates, and changing plant life eventually transformed the world that Apatosaurus knew. Over millions of years, new species evolved while others disappeared. The age of the sauropods came to an end long before the great extinction that wiped out most dinosaurs around 66 million years ago. Yet during their time, creatures like Apatosaurus ruled the land without challenge. Their massive bodies and peaceful nature made them symbols of the gentle giants of the prehistoric world. Today, the bones of Apatosaurus continue to tell stories from the distant past. Each fossilized vertebra, rib, and limb bone gives scientists new information about how this enormous creature lived, breathed, and moved. Museums around the world proudly display its skeletons, often towering above visitors and filling entire halls. Standing beneath one of these reconstructed giants, people can feel just how enormous and powerful these creatures once were. It's hard to believe that inside such a massive frame was a brain no bigger than a fruit. yet it was enough to control the muscles, organs, and movements of a living mountain of flesh and bone. In the grand story of life on Earth, Apatosaurus stands as a reminder that nature's designs come in many forms. Intelligence was not its strength, but endurance was. It lived in herds, walked great distances, and survived in a world filled with predators and changing landscapes. Its existence shows that even a creature with a small brain can leave a large mark on history, a mark that has lasted for more than 150 million years. The slow-moving, plant-eating Apatosaurus may not have been clever or quick, but it was one of the true giants of the Earth, a creature whose very name still echoes with the memory of thunderous footsteps across the prehistoric land. Among the many giants that once walked across the prehistoric world, few were as striking and memorable as Diplodocus. This enormous creature, which lived during the late Jurassic period about 150 million years ago, was a true marvel of ancient nature. Its long neck stretched like a living bridge between the ground and the treetops, allowing it to reach leaves that most other dinosaurs could only stare at in hunger. Diplodocus was not a hunter or a fighter. It was a peaceful grazer, a slow-moving plant-eater that spent most of its life searching for vegetation to fill its vast stomach. Yet, for all its enormous size and graceful shape, it was not a creature of great intelligence. Its brain was so small that it could fit inside something no larger than a coffee cup. Nature had given it a gigantic body, but only the simplest of minds, designed not for problem-solving, but for survival through instinct and routine. The fossil bones of Diplodocus were first discovered in the late 19th century in North America, in places that are now part of Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and Utah. The name Diplodocus means double beam, a reference to the unique shape of the bones in its tail. Those tail bones had 2 rows of supporting rods that helped give the tail strength and flexibility, which was important because the tail was incredibly long, so long that it may have acted like a whip. Some scientists believe Diplodocus could swing its tail fast enough to make a sharp cracking sound, perhaps as a warning to predators or as a way to communicate with other members of its group. The size of Diplodocus was breathtaking. A fully grown adult could reach a length of about 90 feet, which is roughly the same as 3 city buses parked end to end. Some specimens may have been even longer, close to 100 feet from head to tail. Its neck alone stretched over 20 feet, and its tail extended for nearly half its entire body length. Despite its great size, Diplodocus was surprisingly slender and lightweight compared to some of its sauropod relatives. Its bones were filled with air spaces, making them lighter without losing strength, much like the bones of modern birds. This adaptation allowed the creature to move more easily and support its own massive body on land. Its small head was perched at the end of that long, flexible neck, and its mouth was filled with narrow, peg-like teeth. These teeth were perfect for stripping leaves from the branches of trees, but not for chewing. Diplodocus likely swallowed its food whole, relying on stones that it swallowed, called gastroliths, to grind the tough plant material in its large stomach. These stones acted like a primitive food processor, helping it digest the huge amounts of vegetation it needed each day. Scientists estimate that Diplodocus probably spent most of its waking hours eating, consuming hundreds of pounds of ferns, cycads, and conifer needles daily just to sustain its massive body. The long neck of Diplodocus was one of its most remarkable features. For many years, scientists believed that it used its neck like a giraffe, stretching upward to feed on the tops of trees. Later studies suggested that it might have kept its neck more horizontal, sweeping it from side to side to feed across a wide area without moving its entire body. Either way, the long neck gave Diplodocus access to food that few other dinosaurs could reach. This advantage meant that it did not have to compete directly with lower-feeding plant eaters, such as Stegosaurs or smaller sauropods. Its design was efficient, allowing it to stand in one place and feed for long periods, using little energy for movement. Its tail, on the other hand, was an engineering masterpiece of balance and defense. It acted like a counterweight to the long neck, helping the creature stay steady as it moved. The tail was made up of more than 80 bones, tapering into a thin whip-like end. There is evidence that Diplodocus might have used its tail as a weapon, swinging it with enough force to scare off attackers or even cause injury. Some computer simulations suggest the tip of the tail could break the sound barrier, making a crack as loud as a gunshot. Whether it actually did this in real life is uncertain, but the possibility shows just how complex and impressive the tail structure was. Even though Diplodocus looked intimidating due to its size, it was actually a gentle creature. Its diet consisted only of plants, and it had no sharp claws or teeth for attacking others. When threatened by large predators such as Allosaurus or Ceratosaurus, which lived at the same time, it probably relied on its size, its long tail, and the safety of moving in herds. Living in groups might have been one of its few defensive strategies, since a single Diplodocus, no matter how large, could still be vulnerable when alone. Its enormous body required a complex system to pump blood from its heart all the way up its long neck to the brain. Scientists have often wondered how such a creature managed to circulate blood effectively without fainting. Some researchers suggest that Diplodocus had an exceptionally strong heart, or possibly several auxiliary blood pumps in its neck to assist with circulation. Others believe that its neck might not have been held high vertically most of the time, reducing the strain on its heart. Whatever the case, its biology had to be finely tuned to keep its massive body functioning smoothly. Diplodocus also had a unique skeletal structure that allowed for stability and mobility. Its backbone was supported by a network of long, bony rods and tendons that ran along its spine, helping it bear its own weight. The legs were thick and column-like, built more for strength than for speed. The front legs were slightly shorter than the hind legs, giving its back a gentle slope from shoulders to hips. This shape may have helped it reach higher vegetation more easily, or even allowed it to rear up on its hind legs occasionally, using its tail as a third support to feed on trees that were otherwise out of reach. The skin of Diplodocus has also been studied in detail, thanks to fossilized impressions found in certain sites. These impressions show that its skin was not smooth, but covered with small pebbly scales. Along its back and tail, some fossils even show evidence of small spines or bumps, possibly used for display or defense. The color of its skin remains unknown, but scientists speculate it might have been earthy tones like brown, green, or grey, helping it blend into its forested surroundings. The environment where Diplodocus lived was lush and filled with life. During the late Jurassic, the regions that are now part of Western North America were warm, with seasonal rains and rich vegetation. Vast floodplains, river valleys, and fern-covered forests provided plenty of food for large plant-eating dinosaurs. Diplodocus shared its world with many other famous species, including the plated Stegosaurus, the horned Ceratosaurus, and the fierce predator Allosaurus. Fossil evidence shows that these creatures lived close together, forming a diverse ecosystem where each species filled its own role. Diplodocus fossils have helped paleontologists understand a great deal about sauropod anatomy and behavior. The first complete skeleton was discovered in the 1800s by an American paleontologist named Othniel Charles Marsh, during a time known as the Bone Wars, when scientists were racing to discover new dinosaur species. Marsh named the first specimen Diplodocus longus in 1878, and later discoveries revealed even larger individuals. These fossils became some of the most famous dinosaur exhibits in museums around the world, including the American Museum of Natural History in New York and the Natural History Museum in London. In fact, for many years, a life-size cast of a Diplodocus skeleton, nicknamed Dippy, stood in the entrance hall of the London Museum and became one of the most recognised dinosaur displays in history. Because of its elegant proportions and impressive length, Diplodocus became one of the best-known dinosaurs to the general public. It was often depicted in early paintings and books as a slow-moving, swamp-dwelling creature, spending most of its time partly submerged in water to support its weight. This idea was popular in the early 20th century, when scientists thought sauropods were too heavy to stand fully on land. Later research, however, proved that this was incorrect. The skeleton of Diplodocus shows strong leg bones and joints perfectly capable of supporting its body on solid ground. It lived on dry land, moving across open plains and forests in search of vegetation. Despite its size, Diplodocus was not a fast creature. Its long legs allowed it to take big strides, but its speed was limited. Scientists estimate that it probably moved at a pace of around 5 to 10 miles per hour when walking, and possibly a little faster if it needed to move quickly. However, running was likely impossible for such a heavy animal. Speed was not its main concern. Survival depended on finding enough food and staying away from danger. Its best defense was simply its size. Few predators would risk attacking something that large unless it was a young or injured individual. Diplodocus was part of a large family of sauropods, and many of its close relatives shared similar body shapes. Among these were Apatosaurus, Barosaurus, and Supersaurus, all of which lived in roughly the same region and time period. Diplodocus, however, was generally more slender and lightweight compared to some of its cousins. Its tail and neck were especially elongated, giving it a more graceful appearance. Some paleontologists think that Diplodocus may have used its neck for social behaviours as well, such as showing dominance or attracting mates. The long neck could move in sweeping motions, and it might have been used for gentle nudging or displays during interaction with others of its kind. Although its brain was small, Diplodocus was not helpless. Its instincts were well adapted to its lifestyle. It did not need intelligence to plan or hunt. Its main tasks were simple: eat, move, and reproduce. The small brain was perfectly adequate for controlling its massive body and coordinating movement. There is even evidence that some sauropods had a second nerve centre or nerve bundle located near the hips, which might have helped control the rear half of the body, especially the long tail. This secondary nerve centre would have allowed the tail and legs to react quickly without needing to wait for signals from the tiny brain far away in the skull. The reproduction of Diplodocus followed the same basic pattern as most other dinosaurs. The females laid eggs, which were likely buried in sand or soil to protect them from predators. Fossilized sauropod nesting sites show that the eggs were not extremely large compared to the size of the adult. Most were about the size of a large grapefruit. This was probably because smaller eggs were easier to lay and bury. The young Diplodocus hatchlings would have been small and vulnerable, growing rapidly over the years until they reached their gigantic adult size. Growth must have been steady and constant, fueled by enormous amounts of food. For a long time, paleontologists debated how Diplodocus held its neck. Some believed it was mostly horizontal, sweeping low across the ground to feed on ferns and low plants. Others thought it could raise its head high to feed from the upper branches of tall trees. Studies of its vertebrae suggest that its neck was flexible and capable of both positions, though not as upright as a giraffe's. It likely moved its neck in gentle arcs, feeding from different heights without needing to move its entire body very often. This feeding style made it highly efficient, allowing it to consume large amounts of vegetation with minimal energy. Another interesting aspect of Diplodocus anatomy is its nostrils. The openings were located high on the skull, near the top of the head rather than near the snout. This unusual position once led scientists to think that it lived in water, using the nostrils as a sort of snorkel. However, later discoveries showed that this was not the case. The high placement may have simply been part of its skull design, or related to its sense of smell. Its sense of smell was probably not very strong, and its eyesight was average, but these senses were sufficient for detecting nearby plants or sensing danger. The world Diplodocus lived in was very different from today's Earth. The continents were still joined together in large land masses, and the climate was warm and humid. Giant conifers, cycads, and ferns dominated the landscape, and the air was rich with oxygen and moisture. Rivers and lakes were surrounded by dense vegetation, providing endless food for large herbivores. In these environments, herds of Diplodocus may have wandered slowly from one area to another, stripping trees bare as they passed. After they moved on, the vegetation would have regrown, allowing the cycle to continue. The skeleton of Diplodocus reveals that its neck and tail were not only long, but also made up of an extraordinary number of vertebrae. The neck alone contained more than 15 vertebrae, each one extended by long bony structures that made the neck appear even longer. These bones had hollow spaces to reduce weight while maintaining strength. The same was true for the tail, which contained over 80 vertebrae that gradually became smaller toward the tip. This structure allowed the tail to move quickly and flexibly while remaining lightweight. Because Diplodocus fossils are among the most complete of any large sauropod, scientists have been able to create highly detailed reconstructions of its posture and movement. Computer models show how its neck might have moved and how its massive body was supported by its limbs. These studies have helped paleontologists understand how such an enormous creature could live on land without collapsing under its own weight. The discovery of multiple Diplodocus specimens in the same rock layers also suggests that they lived in groups, moving together across the landscape much like modern elephants or giraffes. Living in herds would have provided several advantages. For one, there was safety in numbers. Predators would find it more difficult to attack a group than a single individual. The adults could protect the young, and the group could detect danger more easily. Additionally, herd movement allowed Diplodocus to find food more efficiently, migrating to new areas when vegetation ran low. Some scientists think that Diplodocus herds might have followed seasonal routes, moving between river valleys and forested plains depending on the time of year. The lifespan of Diplodocus is not precisely known, but it likely lived for several decades. Large animals tend to have long lives, and given the slow growth and enormous size of this dinosaur, it may have lived for 50 to 70 years or more. During its life, it would have seen changes in the landscape caused by shifting rivers, growing forests, and occasional volcanic activity. Fossil evidence shows that the world of the late Jurassic was rich and dynamic, filled with both danger and abundance. One of the most fascinating things about Diplodocus is how much it has taught scientists about the limits of animal size and biology. Its enormous body challenged early paleontologists to understand how such creatures could exist. Every part of its anatomy, from the lightweight bones to the counterbalancing tail, shows careful adaptation to make its size possible. Even though its brain was tiny, its body was one of the most efficient biological designs ever created. Nature seemed to have found a way to build a creature that could reach the treetops, eat endlessly, and roam the prehistoric world with quiet strength. When modern artists and scientists reconstruct Diplodocus today, they often portray it as a majestic creature walking gracefully through forests or across open plains, its neck swaying as it feeds and its tail trailing like a living banner behind it. It is not portrayed as fierce or aggressive, but as peaceful and steady, representing one of the gentler sides of the dinosaur age. Its small brain and slow movements do not make it any less impressive. In fact, they highlight how nature sometimes chooses simplicity over complexity. Diplodocus did not need cleverness or cunning to survive. Its size, structure, and instincts were enough to ensure its success for millions of years. Every fossil bone of Diplodocus tells part of this ancient story. The curves of its vertebrae, the shape of its skull, and the structure of its limbs all reveal how life once thrived in a world so different from our own. It reminds us that intelligence is not the only key to survival. Sometimes, being big, strong, and well adapted to your environment is all that is required. Diplodocus, with its long neck and small brain, may not have been clever, but it was one of nature's greatest giants, perfectly suited to the world it lived in so long ago. Life in the ancient world was filled with enormous creatures that moved slowly across forests, plains, and floodplains that stretched as far as the eye could see. Among these gigantic animals, few were as steady, peaceful, and single-minded as the Camarasaurus. It lived during a time when the Earth was ruled by giants, long before humans existed, during the late part of the Jurassic period, roughly between 155 million and 145 million years ago. In those ancient days, vast green landscapes were covered in conifers, ferns, and cycads, and the air was thick with moisture and warmth. The Camarasaurus was one of the most common long-necked dinosaurs of North America, walking side by side with other giants like Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, and Brachiosaurus. But unlike its more famous relatives, it was not built to impress with record-breaking size or towering height. It was a creature of strength and simplicity, living mostly for one purpose: eating plants and keeping itself safe from predators. The Camarasaurus was a sauropod, which means it belonged to the same family as those long-necked, long-tailed, four-legged plant-eaters that dominated the Jurassic landscapes. It was big, of course. Everything about it was big, but not as gigantic as some of the others. A full-grown Camarasaurus could stretch up to about 60 feet in length, which is around the size of 3 buses parked in a line, and it could weigh as much as 20 tons, which is about the same as a large group of elephants. Despite this massive size, its skull was surprisingly small. Inside that skull was a brain that scientists believe was about the size of a lemon. For such a huge body, its brain was tiny, so small that it likely could not think in complex ways or plan ahead like mammals or birds can today. The Camarasaurus was not clever or cunning. It relied mostly on simple instincts, guided by hunger and the need to stay alive. Its name, Camarasaurus, means chambered lizard, and that name came from the hollow spaces found in its vertebrae. When paleontologists discovered its fossil bones, they noticed that the vertebrae had large hollow chambers within them. These hollows made the bones lighter, which helped support its gigantic frame without being too heavy. Without these air spaces, it would have been almost impossible for such a large animal to move. The structure of its skeleton was a masterpiece of natural engineering, massive but efficient. Its thick legs were shaped like pillars, much like the columns of an ancient temple, perfectly designed to hold up its immense body. The front legs were slightly shorter than the back ones, giving it a gentle slope from its shoulders down to its tail. Each foot ended with broad, cushioned toes that helped spread its weight across the ground, keeping it from sinking into the soft earth. The Camarasaurus moved slowly, but it was steady and strong. Its gait was heavy but graceful in a strange way, with each step shaking the ground beneath it. When it walked, it probably moved its tail slightly above the ground like a counterbalance, and its neck swung gently from side to side as it reached for leaves and branches. Its neck was shorter than that of Diplodocus or Brachiosaurus, but it was thick and muscular. This meant it could handle tougher plants that grew lower down, such as ferns, cycads, and young conifers. While Brachiosaurus stretched high into the treetops and Diplodocus swept the ground with its long neck, Camarasaurus probably fed at a middle level, stripping vegetation from shrubs and medium-height trees. This difference in feeding height may have helped the species live together without competing for food. The head of Camarasaurus was large compared to its relatives, but small when compared to its body. Its face had a blunt box-like shape with large nostrils and big eyes. Its teeth were strong and spoon-shaped, well adapted for tearing tough plant material. Unlike some sauropods that had peg-like teeth suitable only for soft leaves, Camarasaurus could chew tougher vegetation. It probably used its teeth to bite off branches and grind them slightly before swallowing, which may have helped it digest food more efficiently than some of its relatives. Fossilized teeth found in ancient riverbeds and floodplains show heavy wear, which means it spent much of its time eating day after day to keep its enormous body fed. Scientists believe that a single Camarasaurus might have eaten hundreds of pounds of plants every day, constantly searching for food in the ancient forests. Its small brain did not mean that Camarasaurus was helpless or unaware of its surroundings. It had large eyes, and its sense of sight may have been quite good. It probably could detect movement easily, which would have helped it notice predators such as Allosaurus or Ceratosaurus that hunted in the same environment. When danger approached, Camarasaurus could not run fast, but it could stand its ground. With its thick legs, powerful tail, and sheer size, it was not an easy target. A full-grown Camarasaurus was simply too massive for most predators to attack directly. The young ones, however, were far more vulnerable. Fossil evidence shows that the smaller, younger sauropods were often preyed upon, and it is possible that adult Camarasaurs formed herds or groups to protect their young. Moving in groups might have also helped them find food and stay alert to danger. Scientists have found many fossils of Camarasaurus across North America, especially in areas like the Morrison Formation, a famous stretch of rock that runs through several states, including Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. This area has produced some of the most important dinosaur fossils ever found, and Camarasaurus bones are among the most common. This abundance suggests that it was one of the dominant plant eaters of its time. Complete skeletons have been found, including skulls, which is rare for sauropods since their heads were often separated from the body before fossilization. These well-preserved fossils have given scientists a detailed look at its anatomy and way of life. In fact, the first Camarasaurus fossils were described in the year 1877 by a paleontologist named Edward Drinker Cope, one of the most famous figures in the history of American paleontology. During the late 19th century, Cope and his rival, Othniel Charles Marsh, were part of what became known as the Bone Wars, a fierce competition to discover and name new dinosaur species. Camarasaurus was one of Cope's great finds, and it has remained one of the best-known sauropods ever since. The climate during the time of Camarasaurus was warm and seasonal. There were wet and dry periods, with rivers that swelled during the rainy months and shrank during droughts. Camarasaurus lived in open woodlands and floodplains where vegetation was plentiful, and it likely migrated short distances when the food supply ran low. Fossilized bones of multiple individuals have been found close together, suggesting that they might have traveled in herds. Moving in groups would have helped them find food and water more efficiently, and perhaps even offered some safety from predators. Though they were not fast, their size alone was a powerful defense. A herd of adult Camarasaurs would have looked like moving mountains, massive, slow, and unstoppable. Even though Camarasaurus was not intelligent by modern standards, its body was perfectly adapted for its lifestyle. Its long neck and tail helped it balance, Its strong teeth helped it process plants, and its hollow bones made it lighter and more efficient. Its digestive system was likely enormous, taking up most of its body cavity. Scientists think it swallowed plants whole, which were then fermented and broken down by bacteria inside its massive stomach. The process would have produced heat and gases, and perhaps even sounds that echoed through its body as it digested. The creature's day was probably slow and repetitive, spending most of its time feeding, moving to new areas, resting, and feeding again. The world it lived in was far from quiet. The late Jurassic landscape was filled with the sounds of life. Herds of Camarasaurus might have been accompanied by smaller dinosaurs that walked beneath them, picking at the plants left behind. The air would have been filled with the calls of pterosaurs gliding overhead and the distant roars of predators in search of prey. The ground might have trembled under the combined weight of several sauropods moving together. Dust and the smell of vegetation would have filled the air as they passed through forests and long rivers. Although the Camarasaurus may not have been aware of much beyond what it could see and eat, its presence shaped the world around it. By feeding on massive amounts of plants, it helped maintain balance in its ecosystem. Its waste returned nutrients to the soil, allowing new plants to grow. Even in its simplicity, it played an important role in the prehistoric web of life. The fossilized remains of Camarasaurus have helped paleontologists understand how sauropods lived and moved. The arrangement of its bones suggests that it held its neck in a gentle curve, not completely upright like early illustrations once showed. This means it probably fed on plants that were up to 15 or 20 feet high, but not much higher. Its tail was long and flexible, but not whip-like, unlike Diplodocus. It may have been used for balance or possibly as a defensive weapon against predators. Some reconstructions even show that Camarasaurus might have been able to rear up on its hind legs for short moments, using its tail as support to reach slightly higher branches. Such a position would have required great strength, especially in its leg muscles, but its body seems built for it. The world that Camarasaurus walked through was ever-changing. Volcanoes erupted in the distance, rivers shifted their courses, and forests grew and died with the passing of time. When drought struck, food would have become scarce, forcing these great beasts to move long distances. Fossil evidence from bone beds shows that sometimes many individuals died together, possibly during times of drought or while crossing rivers. These tragic events, preserved in stone, now tell the story of creatures that once lived in herds and faced nature's harshness together. Over millions of years, their bones turned to stone, buried beneath layers of sediment, waiting for discovery. The skeleton of a Camarasaurus is one of the most impressive sights in any museum. The huge backbone, the long neck, and the powerful legs tell the story of a creature built on strength and endurance rather than speed or cleverness. Its skull, with its thick teeth and large openings for air passages, shows how it breathed deeply and efficiently to support its enormous body. The nostrils, placed high on its head, may have allowed it to breathe easily even when its head was buried deep in foliage. Some scientists once thought that sauropods like Camarasaurus lived partly in water to support their weight, but this idea has since been dismissed. Their bodies were well suited for life on land. The bones show that they were strong and capable of carrying their massive size with ease. Tracks left in ancient mud show clear footprints with rounded impressions, proving that these animals walked confidently on solid ground. Even though its brain was small, Camarasaurus was not entirely without awareness. It likely recognized other members of its herd through sight or sound. It may have communicated with low rumbles or deep bellows that carried through the ground rather than the air, as some scientists suggest large dinosaurs could have done. Such low-frequency sounds might have been used to keep contact between individuals across long distances. Its brain did not need to be large for such communication. Instincts and simple reactions would have been enough. It may have known when to move, when to stop, when danger was near, and when it was time to seek new feeding grounds. For an animal that size, survival depended not on intelligence but on stability, strength, and endurance. As the Jurassic period gave way to the Cretaceous, the world continued to change. New species appeared while old ones disappeared. The Camarasaurus, like many of its relatives, eventually vanished from the fossil record. Climate shifts, changes in vegetation, and the appearance of new competitors may have played a role. But while it lived, it dominated the landscape, shaping ecosystems with its presence. Its fossils remain as silent witnesses to a time when giants walked the earth and intelligence was not the measure of success. Sheer size and persistence were. Every bone of the Camarasaurus tells a story of life in a world of giants. Its vertebrae, hollow yet strong, reveal nature's clever solution for building creatures of immense size. Its teeth, worn from endless feeding, speak of long days spent stripping leaves and branches. Its leg bones, thick and sturdy, show the power required to move such a heavy body. The discovery of complete skeletons, some with the bones still connected, has allowed scientists to study its structure in great detail. Some fossils even show preserved eggs and embryos, hinting that Camarasaurus laid eggs in nests, perhaps returning to the same sites year after year. The young ones would have hatched small and vulnerable, growing quickly in the safety of the herd. Life for a baby Camarasaurus would have been full of danger, but those that survived would eventually grow into giants themselves. The Morrison Formation, where most Camarasaurus fossils are found, paints a picture of a vibrant ecosystem. There were lakes, rivers, and floodplains filled with vegetation. Herds of Camarasaurus likely shared these areas with other sauropods, stegosaurs with their spiked tails, and predators like Allosaurus. Fossilized footprints from this region show evidence of different dinosaurs moving together across muddy ground. Sometimes, their paths even cross, suggesting moments of predator and prey interaction frozen in time. When scientists uncover these fossils, they can almost imagine the scene: a group of Camarasaurus slowly moving across a riverbed, their long necks swaying, while in the distance an Allosaurus watches from behind the trees, waiting for a chance to strike at the weak or the young. In many ways, the Camarasaurus was a symbol of the balance that existed in Jurassic World. It was neither the biggest nor the smallest, neither the strongest nor the weakest, neither the smartest nor the most foolish. It was simply one of nature's steady and reliable creatures, perfectly designed for its time. Its simple mind did not limit its success. On the contrary, it was a reminder that life's strength can come from simplicity. The Camarasaurus did not need complex thoughts to survive millions of years in a challenging environment. Its body, habits, and instincts were enough to keep it thriving in a world filled with both danger and abundance. Over time, as sediment buried its bones in the ages past, its story was forgotten until paleontologists began uncovering the remains in the 19th century. Each fossil unearthed added a piece to the puzzle of how it lived, moved, and ate. The discovery of its hollow vertebrae helped scientists understand how these giants could grow so large without collapsing under their own weight. The study of its teeth gave clues about its diet. The shape of its skull showed how it breathed and how its senses worked. Through these discoveries, the Camarasaurus became more than just a skeleton in stone. It became a window into a vanished world where strength and endurance ruled the earth. Kentrosaurus was among the strange and wonderful creatures that once roamed the prehistoric world. It looked like a living fortress of spikes and plates. It might not have been the biggest or the fiercest dinosaur to walk the earth, but it was certainly one of the most interesting to look at. Covered with sharp spikes from its neck to its tail, Kentrosaurus was like a walking defense system. But behind all that armor was a creature that nature didn't exactly bless with much intelligence. Its brain was so small compared to its body that scientists often joke its best solution to any problem was simply to swing its tail and hope for the best. Kentrosaurus lived around 150 million years ago during the late Jurassic period in what is now Tanzania, Africa. During that ancient time, the land was warm and lush, with tall ferns, cycads, and conifer trees stretching across wide plains and river valleys. Herds of giant plant-eating dinosaurs wandered through this green world, while predators like Allosaurus lurked in the shadows, always looking for a meal. In such a dangerous environment, a dinosaur like Kentrosaurus needed a good way to stay alive, and it relied on its spikes more than anything else. Intelligence wasn't its strong point, but its body was built for survival. The Kentrosaurus was not a giant compared to some of its relatives. While a Stegosaurus could reach up to around 9 meters in length, Kentrosaurus was only about 4.5 meters long, roughly the size of a large car. It stood about as tall as an adult human at the shoulder, around 1.5 meters. What made it look truly impressive was its armor. Running down its back were 2 rows of bony plates that gradually changed into sharp spikes as they moved toward the tail. The spikes on its tail were especially long, some reaching more than 0.5 meter, and they were strong enough to pierce the flesh of an attacking predator. It was the kind of weapon that made even hungry carnivores think twice before getting too close. Scientists believe Kentrosaurus weighed around 1.5 tons, making it heavy but still smaller and more agile than its bulky cousin Stegosaurus. Its body shape was somewhat low to the ground, with its head close to the earth as it grazed on ferns and other low-growing plants. Its neck was short and stiff, and its skull was small, holding a brain that was no bigger than a walnut. This tiny brain was responsible for controlling its huge body, moving its legs, tail, and muscles, and responding to threats. With so little brain power, Kentrosaurus probably didn't think about much beyond eating, staying with its herd and defending itself from danger. When scientists study fossils of dinosaurs like Kentrosaurus, they sometimes find that the brain cavity is shockingly small compared to the size of the body. In the case of Kentrosaurus, the brain might have been only about the size of a lime, even though the animal itself weighed as much as a small car. This made it one of the least intelligent dinosaurs compared to its size. It didn't have the ability to think, plan, or learn in the way more advanced animals do. Instead, its actions were driven mostly by instinct. If it saw something moving quickly nearby, it didn't stop to think about whether it was a friend or a foe. It simply swung its spiked tail as hard as it could. Those tail spikes were not just for show, they were deadly weapons. The last few pairs of spikes on its tail were long, thick, and pointed backward, forming a kind of living club. Scientists often call this structure a thagomizer, a term borrowed from a cartoon that became popular among paleontologists. If a predator like Allosaurus or Ceratosaurus tried to attack, Kentrosaurus could swing its tail from side to side with surprising force. A single hit could leave deep wounds, break bones, or even kill a smaller predator outright. Because its brain was so small, the dinosaur's reaction was probably automatic. It didn't need to think about how to aim. The movement was likely a reflex triggered by sight, sound, or touch, like a natural defense mechanism built into its body. Despite its dangerous tail, Kentrosaurus was a peaceful plant eater. It spent most of its day looking for food, slowly walking through its Jurassic environment in search of soft plants. Its mouth was shaped for cropping vegetation, and its teeth were small and leaf-shaped, perfect for stripping leaves but not for chewing them well. Like many other herbivorous dinosaurs, it probably swallowed its food almost whole and relied on its large stomach to digest it. Inside its belly, plant material would have been slowly broken down with the help of bacteria, just as it happens in modern-day herbivores like cows. Its long digestive system would have helped it get as many nutrients as possible from the tough plants of its time. Kentrosaurus probably lived in groups rather than alone. Living in herds would have provided some protection from predators, since there would always be many eyes and tails ready to defend the group. A herd of Kentrosaurus moving together must have been an impressive sight. A line of spiked backs shimmering in the sun, each animal swinging its tail slightly as it walked. The spikes could have also helped members of the herd recognize each other. Just like the patterns and colours of modern animals help them tell one another apart, the unique arrangement of spikes might have served as a kind of identity. Scientists believe that, despite their limited intelligence, dinosaurs like Kentrosaurus still had some form of simple social behaviour. In the late Jurassic landscape, Kentrosaurus shared its world with other remarkable creatures. There were massive sauropods like Giraffatitan, which towered above the trees, stretching their long necks to feed on leaves that no other dinosaur could reach. There were fierce meat-eaters like Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus, always prowling in search of prey. Smaller dinosaurs like Dryosaurus and Camptosaurus ran quickly on 2 legs, eating plants and avoiding danger with their speed. Flying reptiles soared in the sky, and primitive birds flapped between trees, while the ground trembled under the steps of the giants. It was a world full of movement and noise, where survival depended on strength, armour, or speed, and sometimes luck. For Kentrosaurus, armour was everything. Its body design shows how evolution focused more on protection than on intelligence. Nature gave it sharp defences, but a brain too small for complex thinking. Still, that was enough. Its instincts worked well for its needs. It didn't have to plan or outsmart anything. It just had to survive long enough to eat, grow, and reproduce. Its spikes made up for what it lacked in cleverness. That balance between brains and armour was one of the key reasons it existed successfully for many thousands of years. Some scientists have wondered how Kentrosaurus used the plates on its back, which were smaller than those of Stegosaurus. In Stegosaurus, the plates were large, leaf-shaped, and possibly used for display or temperature control. In Kentrosaurus, the plates were fewer and quickly turned into spikes along the body, suggesting that defense was more important than anything else. The plates near the neck might have helped protect the base of the skull and shoulders, while the larger spikes on the hips and tail guarded the most vulnerable areas from predators. When threatened, Kentrosaurus probably turned its spiked side toward an attacker, lowered its head, and swung its tail like a whip. The impact of those spikes could have easily punctured skin, causing serious wounds that would send most attackers fleeing. The discovery of Kentrosaurus fossils has provided scientists with important clues about how these armoured dinosaurs lived. The first fossils were found in the early 20th century in the Tendaguru Formation of Tanzania, one of the richest dinosaur fossil sites in Africa. The expedition that uncovered them took place between the years 1909 and 1913, led by a team of German paleontologists. The bones they found included parts of the skull, spine, limbs and tail, which allowed scientists to reconstruct the animal's shape. When they examined the fossils, they realized it was related to Stegosaurus, but clearly smaller and more heavily spiked. They named it Kentrosaurus aethiopicus, Kentrosaurus, meaning sharp-pointed lizard in Greek. Over time, scientists have found more fossils of Kentrosaurus, allowing them to understand its structure in greater detail. Some fossilized bones show signs of healed injuries, possibly caused by fights with predators or even by accidents within the herd. The positioning of the spikes in the fossils also helps researchers understand how flexible its tail was. Studies suggest that Kentrosaurus could swing its tail in wide arcs, giving it a deadly range of motion. Even though its brain was small, its nervous system was perfectly adapted to move that weapon efficiently. Signals from the brain travelled down the spinal cord to the tail muscles, and while that may have taken a fraction of a second longer than in smaller animals, it was still quick enough to defend itself effectively. Life in the late Jurassic was full of challenges for a plant-eating dinosaur like Kentrosaurus. The weather could be harsh, with long dry seasons followed by heavy rains. Rivers sometimes flooded, and volcanic activity occasionally reshaped the land. The plants it depended on could change with the seasons, forcing herds to move constantly in search of food. Water sources attracted both herbivores and predators, creating dangerous encounters. In such an unpredictable world, instincts were more important than intelligence. Kentrosaurus didn't have to think about what to do, its body knew. When threatened, it turned, lowered its body, and swung. That simple reaction might have saved countless individuals from becoming meals. Because its brain was so small, Kentrosaurus probably had limited senses compared to other animals. It likely had poor eyesight and relied more on hearing and touch to detect danger. Its eyes were positioned on the sides of its head, allowing it to see a wide area around it, but not great detail. Its sense of smell might have been average, good enough to detect nearby plants or predators, but not as strong as in meat-eating dinosaurs. Still, these basic senses were enough to guide its behavior. It didn't need to solve puzzles or learn new tricks, it just needed to know when to eat, where to move, and when to defend itself. When scientists compare the brain size of dinosaurs to their body mass, Kentrosaurus ranks among the least intelligent. But intelligence is not always necessary for survival. Evolution often favours traits that work best in specific environments, and in the world of the Jurassic, armour could be just as valuable as brains. The spikes of Kentrosaurus acted as a constant warning to anything that might threaten it. Even large predators, which relied on ambush and power, would have thought twice before attacking such a dangerous-looking target. A single mistake could cost them dearly, and predators often preferred easier prey. Some paleontologists think the spikes might have also been used for display during mating rituals. Males could have shown off their spikes to attract females or to warn rivals. The shinier or larger the spikes, the stronger the individual might have appeared. During such displays, Kentrosaurus might have raised its body, flicked its tail, or made low rumbling sounds to show dominance. Though it had little intelligence, instinctive behaviours like these were common among animals of all ages and species, both ancient and modern. The study of Kentrosaurus also helps scientists understand how evolution can produce similar designs in different animals. In other parts of the world, there were other spiked and plated dinosaurs that evolved separately, but shared the same general idea: heavy armour and a small brain. For example, Stegosaurus in North America and Tuojiangosaurus in China looked somewhat similar, even though they lived on different continents. This shows that nature found the same solution again and again. If an animal couldn't run fast or think quickly, it could survive by turning its body into a wall of armour. Because Kentrosaurus fossils were found in Africa, it provides valuable information about how dinosaurs spread across ancient continents. During the Jurassic period, Africa was still connected to other land masses as part of the supercontinent Gondwana. This allowed species to move between areas that are now South America, Africa, and Antarctica. The presence of Kentrosaurus in Tanzania shows that the Stegosaur family had spread far and wide, adapting to different climates and conditions. It is possible that similar dinosaurs roamed parts of what are now southern Africa and even Madagascar, though no direct fossils have been found there yet. Over millions of years, the environment that Kentrosaurus lived in changed. Volcanic eruptions covered parts of the land with ash, rivers shifted course, and climates cooled in some regions. New plant species evolved, and new predators appeared. Eventually, the Kentrosaurus and its relatives disappeared, replaced by other kinds of herbivores better suited to the new conditions. But during its time, Kentrosaurus had been perfectly adapted to its world. Its small brain might make it seem primitive by human standards, but it was exactly what it needed to survive. When we look at reconstructions of Kentrosaurus today in museums or scientific illustrations, it's easy to be amazed by its appearance. Its body looks both beautiful and fearsome, with spikes gleaming along its back like the points of a crown. Artists often show it standing quietly among ferns, its tail slightly raised, ready to strike if danger approached. It's a reminder of how diverse and imaginative nature can be. Even a creature with such a small brain could inspire awe with its design. In popular culture, Kentrosaurus has sometimes been overshadowed by its larger cousin, Stegosaurus, but it has appeared in documentaries and dinosaur books as an example of how varied the Jurassic world was. It might not have been as famous, but it was every bit as fascinating. Children often find it exciting because of its sharp spikes and the idea that it could defend itself so well. Paleontologists find it valuable for understanding how evolution experimented with body armor in dinosaurs. And for anyone studying animal behavior, it serves as a reminder that survival doesn't always depend on intelligence. It depends on how well a creature fits its environment. Some reconstructions suggest that Kentrosaurus could have used its tail in a very controlled way, almost like a whip. If that was true, it would have made it an even more dangerous opponent. Tests using models of its skeleton show that the tail could swing quickly enough to deliver strong blows, even if the animal itself moved slowly. When predators attacked from behind, Kentrosaurus had the perfect weapon ready. The spikes at the tip of the tail were long and sharp enough to puncture muscle or even bone, which would have caused deadly injuries. Even a large predator might have avoided taking such a risk. Because its brain was small and simple, Kentrosaurus didn't learn from experience the way modern animals do. It couldn't remember specific events or form complex habits. Its behavior was based on natural patterns: eat when hungry, move when threatened, rest when tired. These basic instincts kept it alive. Some scientists even believe that dinosaurs like Kentrosaurus may have had a small bundle of nerves near their hips, sometimes called a second brain, that helped control their tails and legs. This was not an actual brain, but a large nerve cluster that could manage movements faster than signals travelling from the head. In an animal as large as Kentrosaurus, that would have been very useful. It allowed it to swing its tail more quickly than if it had to wait for a command from its tiny brain. Although it lacked intelligence, Kentrosaurus played an important role in its ecosystem. By feeding on plants, it helped keep the vegetation in check and created open spaces where new plants could grow. Its droppings would have returned nutrients to the soil, supporting the growth of fresh vegetation. In this way, Kentrosaurus contributed to the balance of its environment, even if it didn't understand its part in the grand design of nature. When paleontologists examine the fossils of Kentrosaurus, they often find them in layers of rock that were once floodplains or shallow riverbeds. This suggests that the animals sometimes died near water sources, perhaps after droughts, floods, or attacks. Fossilized footprints have also given clues about how it walked. Its movements were steady and deliberate, its legs supporting its heavy body, while its tail swung behind to balance its weight. The position of its bones shows that its back sloped downward from the hips to the shoulders, giving it a slightly hunched look. Despite its clumsy shape, it was well balanced and capable of steady movement across uneven ground. In the quiet moments of its life, Kentrosaurus would have gone about its day peacefully. Early in the morning, it might have wandered through misty valleys, feeding on soft ferns that grew near rivers. As the sun rose higher, it would move slowly through shaded areas to avoid the heat. Its tough skin protected it from insects and the sun's rays. When danger approached, a rustle in the ferns, a low growl, it would freeze for a moment, then quickly turn and swing its tail, the spikes flashing through the air. Once the danger passed, it would return to feeding, its small brain already forgetting what had just happened. Each day was the same routine, repeated over and over, yet for Kentrosaurus, that was all life needed to be. For millions of years, creatures like Kentrosaurus lived, thrived, and disappeared, leaving behind only bones buried deep in stone. When those bones are uncovered, they tell the story of a world where intelligence was not the only path to survival. The Kentrosaurus, with its tiny brain and mighty spikes, stands as proof that nature can create success in many forms. It may not have thought much, but it lived long enough to earn its place in history, and its legacy continues every time we look at its fossils and imagine the slow, steady rhythm of its ancient life among the ferns of the Jurassic world. Of all the strange creatures that ever walked the ancient Earth, few were quite as peculiar as the Pachycephalosaurus. This dinosaur, whose name means thick-headed lizard, truly lived up to its title. It was a creature that seemed to have evolved a skull so solid and heavy that it looked more like a living battering ram than a thinking animal. Its most famous behaviour, bashing its massive dome-shaped head against others of its kind, has puzzled scientists for many years. It was a dinosaur built for impact, not intelligence, and while it might have been fascinating to look at, its actions often seem to defy all logic or sense. The Pachycephalosaurus lived during the late Cretaceous period, about 66 million years ago, near the very end of the age of dinosaurs. It roamed what is now North America, in regions that would one day become parts of the United States and Canada. Back then, the world was warm, lush, and filled with dense forests, ferns, and flowering plants. Herds of plant-eating dinosaurs wandered across open plains, while predators like Tyrannosaurus rex lurked nearby. In this dangerous world, where tooth and claw ruled every day, the Pachycephalosaurus stood out not for its size or speed, but for the thick dome of bone on top of its head, a structure that could be up to 10 inches thick. Its body was built for movement, but not for fighting. Pachycephalosaurus grew to about 15 feet long and may have weighed close to 1,000 pounds, roughly the size of a small car. Its body was stocky, its legs strong, and it walked on 2 feet like many other bipedal dinosaurs. It had short arms, a long stiff tail for balance, and a small head except for the massive bony dome. Its eyes were large and set to the sides, giving it a wide field of vision. However, the space inside that huge skull left little room for a brain. The brain of Pachycephalosaurus was small, so small that even though it had one of the thickest skulls among dinosaurs, it was far from one of the smartest. Scientists believe its brain was no larger than that of a cat, perhaps even smaller when compared to its body size. The creature was more instinct-driven than thoughtful, reacting rather than reasoning. Its main interest was likely food, safety, and simple competition. When rival males met during the breeding season, instead of displaying colourful feathers or making loud calls like some modern birds do, they probably lowered their heads and charged straight at each other. It was a spectacular but silly sight. 2 thick-headed dinosaurs running full speed only to crash skull first into one another, producing a thundering impact that might have echoed across the ancient plains. The idea that Pachycephalosaurus used its head for fighting has long been one of the most popular and debated topics in paleontology. Early scientists, upon seeing the strange domed skulls, imagined fierce head-butting contests, much like those seen in modern-day rams or goats. These dinosaurs, they thought, must have used their reinforced skulls to compete for mates or to establish dominance. The skull dome, being so thick, was seen as natural armour to protect the brain during these violent encounters. However, later research revealed that this explanation might not be as simple or as sensible as it first seemed. When scientists studied the skull structure in detail, they discovered that the thick bone was not flat or solid throughout. Instead, it was filled with a network of tiny chambers, somewhat like sponge-like bone tissue. This raised doubts about whether the skull could actually withstand repeated head-on impacts without causing injury. Moreover, the neck of Pachycephalosaurus was not built for heavy collisions. Unlike animals designed for head-butting, such as bighorn sheep, which have special shock-absorbing neck muscles and skull shapes, Pachycephalosaurus had a neck that would have been strained or even damaged by such violent impacts. Some experts began to think that these dinosaurs might not have slammed their heads directly together after all. Instead, they could have engaged in side-butting, flank-butting, or even head-shoving contests, where the blows were less direct but still served to show strength. Others proposed that the domed skulls were used more for display than for combat, perhaps to attract mates or to intimidate rivals just by their appearance. The thick dome might have been brightly coloured or patterned, allowing males to show off their health and strength without needing to bash anything. Despite these ideas, the image of Pachycephalosaurus as a headbutter remains popular. It is easy to picture two of them charging at each other, their tails straight out for balance, their small arms tucked close to their bodies, their powerful legs pounding the ground as they prepared for impact. When their skulls met, the sound would have been a deep, bone-shaking crack. Dust would rise and one might stumble back while the other strutted proudly, the victor of a test of brute force and stubbornness. It was not exactly intelligent behaviour, but it fit the animal's nature, a creature that seemed to rely more on strength and endurance than on brains. Living in herds or small groups, Pachycephalosaurus probably spent much of its time grazing quietly on low plants. It was a herbivore, feeding mainly on soft leaves, fruits and seeds. Its small serrated teeth were designed for slicing rather than grinding, meaning it may have preferred tender vegetation or fallen fruits from trees. Its beak-like mouth could pluck plants efficiently, and its height allowed it to reach shrubs and low-hanging branches. Though its head was built like a battering ram, its daily life was far more peaceful, revolving around feeding, resting, and staying alert for danger. Predators were always a threat, especially giant carnivores like Tyrannosaurus rex, which lived in the same regions. If threatened, Pachycephalosaurus likely relied on its legs to flee rather than to fight. But if escape was impossible, it might have lowered its head and used its thick skull as a last line of defense, swinging it toward an attacker in desperation. While that might not have been the smartest move, it could at least have startled a predator long enough for the dinosaur to escape. The fossils of Pachycephalosaurus have told scientists much about its life, but also created many mysteries. For years, paleontologists debated whether the many dome-headed dinosaur fossils found across North America represented different species or simply different growth stages of one species. Some smaller, flatter-headed fossils once named as other genera, like Dracorex and Stygimoloch, were later thought to be younger Pachycephalosaurus individuals. As they matured, their skulls thickened and the domes grew larger, turning the once smooth heads into great bony helmets. This means that many of the so-called different species may have just been juveniles of the same animal, still growing their famous skull domes. This gradual thickening of the skull bone as the dinosaur aged is one of the most fascinating features of Pachycephalosaurus anatomy. As juveniles, they had flatter skulls with more spikes and knobs along the edges. As adults, those spikes wore down and the dome expanded upward and outward, creating the smooth, rounded head typical of mature individuals. This process took years, showing that the animals changed greatly in appearance as they grew, much like how deer develop antlers or birds gain colourful feathers only when they reach maturity. Even though its brain was small, Pachycephalosaurus was not completely foolish. Its large eyes and good sense of balance suggest that it was alert and agile. It may have been able to run quickly across open ground to escape danger or chase rivals. Its tail, stiffened by rows of bony tendons, acted like a counterbalance, helping it stay steady as it moved. It likely used sight more than smell, scanning the landscape for movement rather than tracking scents. Its world was filled with danger, and even a not-so-smart dinosaur needed sharp senses to survive. When one thinks about the Pachycephalosaurus, it is hard not to imagine the sound of those head clashes echoing across prehistoric valleys, or the sight of males circling one another ready to charge. It was an animal that seemed to combine brute strength with limited intelligence, a living example of what evolution can produce when survival depends more on display and physical endurance than on cleverness. Nature often experiments, and the Pachycephalosaurus was one of its more curious results. A creature designed for a behaviour that may not have made much evolutionary sense, but still worked well enough for millions of years. The structure of its skull, even apart from the dome, was unique among dinosaurs. Around the edges of the dome, the bone was ornamented with small bumps and ridges. These might have served as attachment points for skin or keratin coverings, possibly forming colourful patterns. Some scientists suggest that the skin over the dome might have been thin and rich with blood vessels, allowing the dinosaur to change its coloration slightly during mating displays or confrontations. If true, this would have made the Pachycephalosaurus even more striking, a creature whose head could literally flush with colour as it prepared to show off or challenge a rival. Another curious aspect of this dinosaur's anatomy is how its thick skull might have affected its senses. Because the bone was so dense, its hearing might have been somewhat limited, especially for higher-pitched sounds. However, it could probably detect deep vibrations through the ground, much like how elephants sense distant rumbles today. This sensitivity might have helped it detect the approach of large predators, or even other Pachycephalosauruses moving nearby. The discovery of Pachycephalosaurus fossils began in the early 20th century, when paleontologists exploring the rich fossil beds of Montana and South Dakota found the first dome-shaped skull fragments. These fossils puzzled them at first. Were they the heads of some strange reptile, or perhaps part of a larger dinosaur's body armour? Eventually, they realised these bones represented a new kind of dinosaur altogether. Since then, more remains have been found, though most are still limited to skulls and a few partial skeletons. Complete skeletons are rare, leaving much about the body structure and behaviour of the animal open to interpretation. Despite this, the Pachycephalosaurus has become one of the most recognisable dinosaurs in popular culture. Its bizarre dome and supposed head-butting behaviour have made it a favourite in movies, books and museum exhibits. It often appears as a kind of prehistoric foolhardy gladiator, charging, colliding and repeating the act over and over again without any apparent thought. In truth, it might not have been as reckless as it seems, but its appearance certainly lends itself to that reputation. Its name itself, Pachycephalosaurus, was given in recognition of its most distinctive feature. The term comes from Greek words meaning thick-headed lizard, and it perfectly describes the animal. While it may sound unkind, it fits both its physical nature and its apparent behaviour. The dinosaur's thick skull was both its defining trait and the source of its fame. Even today, when scientists look at its fossils, they cannot help but marvel at how evolution produced such an odd combination of strength and simplicity. The landscape where Pachycephalosaurus once lived was a world full of variety. Rivers wound through forests of conifers and flowering plants, and the air buzzed with insects. Small mammals scurried through the underbrush, and flying reptiles glided overhead. The days were warm, the nights cooler, and seasonal changes brought shifts in vegetation that would have influenced the herds of herbivores. In this ecosystem, Pachycephalosaurus had to share space with Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, Edmontosaurus, and many other plant-eating giants. Predators such as Tyrannosaurus rex and Dromaeosaurus kept all of them alert. To survive among these creatures, even a relatively slow-witted dinosaur like Pachycephalosaurus needed to be cautious. It may have stayed in groups, where there was safety in numbers. Younger individuals could have relied on older ones for protection and guidance, though not in the thoughtful way modern mammals care for their young. Instead, it was likely instinct, a deep, ancient drive to stay together, to move as a herd, and to react quickly to threats. When the Great Extinction Event struck about 66 million years ago, wiping out the non-avian dinosaurs, Pachycephalosaurus vanished along with them. Its thick skulls, however, endured through time as fossils, preserving the story of this remarkable creature. Those skulls, buried under layers of rock and soil for millions of years, are now displayed in museums, still showing the signs of old injuries and bone growth that hint at its behaviour. Some even bear healed fractures, suggesting that head-butting, or some form of cranial combat, really did occur. While it may not have been a creature of great intelligence, the Pachycephalosaurus was certainly one of great curiosity and character. Its strange habits, odd anatomy, and uncertain motives make it stand out among the countless species that once populated the Earth. It shows how evolution sometimes favours the unexpected, how nature can create animals with features that seem almost absurd by human standards, yet serve their purpose well enough to sustain life for millions of years. What makes this dinosaur especially fascinating is that it challenges our understanding of intelligence and adaptation. Even though it had a small brain and behaved in seemingly irrational ways, it thrived in its environment. Its survival depended not on cleverness, but on durability, instinct, and sheer physical design. In a world ruled by enormous predators and constant change, perhaps a thick skull and a simple way of thinking were exactly what it needed. Over the years, artists and scientists alike have tried to recreate what Pachycephalosaurus might have looked like in life. Some illustrations show it covered in scales of muted earth tones, blending with its environment, while others depict it with bright, vivid colours on its head and back. Its dome might have glistened in the sunlight, catching the attention of rivals or potential mates. Its movements were likely quick and bird-like, with short bursts of speed followed by careful pauses to graze or observe. Though not graceful, it had a certain rugged charm, a creature that embodied persistence more than elegance. In many ways, the Pachycephalosaurus represents one of evolution's strangest experiments, a dinosaur that seemed to value head strength over brain power. Its behaviour, while questionable in its usefulness, still tells a story about survival, competition, and the wild diversity of life that once filled the earth. It may not have been wise by our standards, but it was well suited to its time and place. Every crack in its fossilised skull is a reminder of that rough ancient life, a time when even the least intelligent of creatures could leave behind a legacy strong enough to capture human imagination millions of years later. For a dinosaur whose most famous feature was its thick head, Pachycephalosaurus has managed to make quite a lasting impression. It remains one of the most instantly recognisable and talked about dinosaurs in science and popular culture alike. Though it might not have been clever, it was tough, and sometimes in the long story of evolution that was enough. The great dome-headed lizard continues to fascinate not because it was smart, but because it was strange, a walking contradiction that bashed its head against the limits of reason and still managed to thrive. Among the last great giants to roam the fading world of the dinosaurs was the enormous Titanosaurus, a creature so massive and so majestic that its very presence must have made the ground tremble beneath its feet. It lived during the late Cretaceous period, around 66 million years ago, when the age of dinosaurs was nearing its final chapter. By then, the Earth was already changing, with shifting climates, new plants, and strange new predators appearing across the continents. Yet, Titanosaurus walked through that ancient landscape seemingly unaware of the approaching end, moving slowly, peacefully, and with little concern for anything other than finding the next patch of leaves to eat. Its life was simple and uneventful, a rhythm of chewing, walking, and resting, repeated day after day across endless plains and forests. Titanosaurus was a true giant among giants, belonging to the family of long-necked, plant-eating dinosaurs known as sauropods. It could stretch more than 40 feet in length, with some relatives in its family tree growing even larger, reaching nearly 100 feet long and weighing as much as 70 tons. Though Titanosaurus itself may not have reached such extremes, it was still enormous enough to dwarf nearly every other creature that shared its world. Its neck was long and flexible, allowing it to sweep across wide areas of vegetation without moving much. Its tail stretched far behind it, heavy and muscular, acting like a counterbalance to its great neck and body. Its legs were thick as tree trunks, built to support its enormous weight, and its feet left deep round prints that would last for ages in the soft mud of ancient riverbanks. Despite its colossal size, Titanosaurus was not a dangerous animal. It had no claws or fangs for hunting, no speed to chase prey, and no armour to protect itself like the Ankylosaurus. Its strength lay only in its size. Most predators would think twice before attacking a creature that could crush them underfoot with a single careless step. But for all its power, Titanosaurus was gentle in nature. It was a creature built for calmness, spending most of its time feeding on plants, moving slowly across the land, and perhaps travelling in small herds with others of its kind. Its eyes were not sharp like those of a hunter, and its brain, hidden deep within its skull, was tiny compared to the vastness of its body. The small size of its brain tells much about how Titanosaurus lived. It was not a thinker or a problem solver. It did not need to plan or to build or to communicate in complex ways. Its brain was little more than a tool for survival, guiding its body to eat, to move, to sleep, and to flee when danger appeared. A creature so huge had little reason to think much beyond that. The world around it must have seemed slow and simple. When it walked through forests, its head brushing the tops of trees, it probably paid little attention to the smaller creatures scattering below. Its instincts were old and unchanging, shaped by millions of years of evolution, to keep it alive in a world where size was its greatest weapon. Titanosaurus was a member of a remarkable group of sauropods known as the Titanosaurs, which were among the last of their kind before extinction. They appeared in South America, India, Africa, and even parts of Europe and Asia, showing how widely these creatures once spread across the ancient world. Fossils of Titanosaurus itself were first discovered in India in the early years of the 20th century near the village of Jabalpur. The paleontologist Richard Lydekker was the first to describe it in the year 1893, based on a set of fossil bones that included vertebrae and parts of the hind limbs. Though the remains were incomplete, they were enough to show that this was a massive, long-necked herbivore, unlike any found before in the region. The name Titanosaurus was chosen to reflect its colossal size, inspired by the titans of Greek mythology, giant beings of incredible strength. Yet, even with its legendary name, Titanosaurus was far from a clever creature. Its actions were guided more by instinct than by awareness. It probably spent most of its time in slow, steady movement, consuming massive amounts of vegetation each day just to fuel its huge body. To maintain its bulk, it would have needed to eat hundreds of pounds of plants daily, perhaps as much as a small forest's worth over time. Its teeth were small and shaped like spoons or pegs, perfect for stripping leaves from branches but not for chewing them well. It likely swallowed leaves and twigs whole, letting its enormous stomach do the rest of the work. Inside that vast belly, stones called gastroliths might have helped grind up the tough plant matter, much like how modern birds use grit in their stomachs to digest food. Because of its great size, Titanosaurus would not have needed to fear most predators. Even a pack of fierce meat-eaters like the Abelisaurus or the Rajasaurus, which lived during the same period in India, would have found it difficult to bring down such a giant. Only the very young or the sick would have been at risk. The adults were simply too large to attack. If threatened, Titanosaurus might have used its heavy tail as a weapon, swinging it from side to side with enough force to break bones, but most of the time it probably ignored danger, too big to care and too slow to run. Its life was one of steady endurance. Titanosaurus did not chase, did not hide, did not build nests high above the ground or dig burrows for safety. It walked the open plains, moving in search of food and water, and when the sun rose high in the sky, it might have stood silently near the edge of a river, its shadow stretching long over the ground. Birds, the descendants of smaller dinosaurs, may have perched on its back to feed on insects crawling over its skin, while smaller animals hid beneath its feet, taking shelter from the heat. The world of Titanosaurus was rich and teeming with life. Ferns, cycads, conifers, and the first flowering plants covered the landscape, while other dinosaurs, reptiles and mammals moved through the undergrowth. Titanosaurus was slow, perhaps even clumsy, but it did not need to be quick. Its heart must have been enormous to pump blood all the way up its long neck to its head. Some scientists believe that sauropods like Titanosaurus had special structures in their necks to help move blood upward, preventing fainting when they raised their heads to feed on tall trees. Others think they might have kept their necks mostly horizontal, feeding on low and mid-level vegetation instead of lifting their heads high. Whichever way it fed, Titanosaurus was perfectly adapted to its slow and steady way of life. Its lungs were likely vast, filled with air sacs like those of modern birds, helping it breathe efficiently despite its size. Its skin may have been rough and scaly, thick enough to resist bites from smaller predators. When night fell and the air cooled, the great beasts may have gathered together, their silhouettes dark against the moonlight. Their deep, rumbling calls could have echoed across the land, slow and low, perhaps to keep contact with one another. They did not have complicated social lives like later mammals would, but they might have felt some simple sense of companionship when travelling in small groups. Herd behaviour was a useful defence after all. A group of giant sauropods would have been nearly impossible for any predator to attack. The earth itself must have quivered under their combined weight as they moved together through forests that now exist only in fossilised memories. Titanosaurus, like most sauropods, probably laid eggs in shallow nests dug into the ground. Fossilised sauropod nesting sites found in India and South America show that titanosaurs laid dozens of eggs at a time, each roughly the size of a grapefruit. The mother likely covered them with vegetation to keep them warm, then left them to hatch on their own. The babies that emerged were tiny compared to their parents, no larger than a house cat, yet they would grow rapidly if they survived. Few probably did. Predators and harsh environments would have claimed many. But those that reached adulthood faced little danger. In many ways, Titanosaurus represented the end of an era. By the time it lived, The world was changing fast. The continents were drifting apart, forming the shapes we recognize today. The great inland seas were shrinking and flowering plants were spreading across the land, replacing the ancient conifer forests. New predators were emerging, faster and more specialized, while volcanic activity and climate shifts began to stress ecosystems. Titanosaurus, with its slow body and small mind, was a survivor of an older age, still following the same ancient patterns that had worked for millions of years. But those patterns would not save it from the catastrophe that was coming. About 66 million years ago, a massive asteroid struck the Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater. The impact released energy greater than billions of atomic bombs, sending fire, dust, and darkness across the globe. Forests burned, skies dimmed, and temperatures dropped. The plants that Titanosaurus depended on for food began to die, and soon the gentle giant itself could not find enough to eat. Its enormous body, built for a world of plenty, could not survive in one of scarcity. Slowly the last of the Titanosaurs vanished, leaving behind only bones and the faint memory of a time when giants ruled the land. Even though Titanosaurus was not intelligent by human standards, or even by the standards of smaller dinosaurs, it had its own quiet kind of wisdom, the kind that comes from harmony with nature. It did not need to think deeply or invent tools. Its very existence was a success, a proof of how life could grow vast and strong simply by adapting to what the world provided. For millions of years, Titanosaurus and its kin shaped the landscapes they walked upon, eating enormous amounts of vegetation and helping to spread plant life through their dung. They were part of a grand balance, playing their role without ever knowing it. The remains of Titanosaurus have long puzzled paleontologists. Because the fossils were incomplete and mixed with those of other dinosaurs, it was hard to tell exactly what made Titanosaurus unique. Some scientists even debated whether Titanosaurus deserved to be its own genus, or whether it was just a name given too quickly to scattered bones. Later discoveries of better preserved titanosaurs, such as Argentinosaurus, Dreadnoughtus and Patagotitan, helped scientists understand what Titanosaurus might have looked like and how it might have lived. These later finds showed that the titanosaurs were among the largest land animals to ever exist, massive creatures with strong, flexible necks, wide bodies, and column-like legs. Titanosaurus may not have been the biggest of them, but it belonged to the same remarkable lineage. Its structure suggests that Titanosaurus, like its relatives, carried much of its weight over its hips, allowing it to stand firmly even on soft ground. Its tail might have acted like a balancing beam, keeping its long neck stable as it reached for food. Some scientists think titanosaurs had defensive bony plates, or osteoderms, embedded in their skin, small pieces of armor that could protect them from bites or injuries. If Titanosaurus had these, they would have given it a slightly rough, knobby texture, adding to its rugged appearance. Yet, even with such protection, it was still a peaceful grazer, a quiet titan moving through its world without malice or ambition. Its brain, though tiny, was still enough to process basic senses. Titanosaurus could likely recognize smells and sounds, detect movement, and remember paths to water or food sources. It did not need to be clever, it only needed to be consistent. Over millions of years, that simple way of living was enough to sustain it. It did not invent, it did not compete with intelligence, it simply existed as nature intended, its immense body and slow mind fitting perfectly into the rhythms of the ancient Earth. In a way, the life of Titanosaurus can be seen as a symbol of nature's patience. Evolution had created a creature that did not need to rush, that moved through life with the unhurried confidence of something that knew it had no equal in size or strength. Its heart beat slowly but powerfully, driving blood through arteries that stretched the length of a bus. Its breath filled lungs large enough to hold hundreds of gallons of air. Its footsteps pressed deep impressions into the soil, each one a mark of quiet dominance. On a typical day, a Titanosaurus might have begun its morning near a riverbank, drinking deeply from the cool water before moving toward groves of ancient trees. It would have torn off branches with its teeth, stripping them bare in moments. Birds and small mammals scurried out of its way. The air would have been thick with the scent of vegetation and damp earth. Hours later it would wander onward, perhaps covering several miles without noticing. When the sun set, it might have rested in a flat open area, its body settling heavily on the ground. Even sleeping, it would have seemed enormous and immovable, like a hill that had somehow come alive. Its world was one of sound and colour, buzzing insects, distant roars of predators, the rustle of trees bending in the wind, the shimmer of dragonflies over ponds. But whether Titanosaurus truly noticed any of it is hard to say. Its mind was likely quiet, focused on survival and the slow satisfaction of feeding. It lived in a state of content simplicity, never aware of how close its kind stood to the end of their reign. When paleontologists uncovered the first bones of Titanosaurus in the dry lands of India, they could hardly imagine the living creature those bones once formed. It must have seemed impossible that such a massive animal could have walked the earth, and yet the evidence was clear. Over time, more fragments appeared, scattered across other parts of the world, showing that titanosaurs were not limited to one place. They were the final chapter in the story of the sauropods, the last of the long-necked giants who had once ruled every continent. The story of Titanosaurus is one of survival without struggle, of strength without aggression, and of size without sharpness or cunning. It was not built for battle or for speed, but for endurance. For millions of years that was enough. It needed no clever tricks to outsmart its environment. Its massive frame and peaceful habits were its shield. Even though its brain was small, perhaps no larger than a small orange, it guided a body that could move mountains with its weight. In a sense, Titanosaurus was a creature of pure instinct and simplicity. It did not ponder the skies or seek meaning in its existence. It followed the quiet laws of life: eat, move, rest, and live as long as the world allowed. Its simplicity did not make it lesser, it made it enduring. While smarter creatures came and went, Titanosaurus and its kin continued for ages, unchanging, like living monuments of evolution's power to shape life on a grand scale. And though it may not have known fear or curiosity, its presence shaped everything around it. Where it walked, the soil was churned. Where it fed, forests changed. Where it lived, new plants sprouted in the fertile ground left behind. Even long after it was gone, the traces of its passing remained, turned to stone, waiting for future beings, creatures far smaller, far smarter, to uncover and wonder at the life of a creature so large and yet so simple. Titanosaurus did not think in the way we do, but it was a masterpiece of survival nonetheless. Its massive frame was nature's triumph, proof that life could grow to impossible sizes when given time and space. It may have lacked intelligence, but it possessed a kind of quiet perfection, a balance between form and function that kept it alive for countless generations. Its world has vanished, its forests turned to dust, its bones buried deep within the earth, but its story still lives, whispering of a time when gentle giants ruled the land with nothing more than size, patience, and the slow rhythm of their endless wandering. There once existed a creature that looked as though it had been built for battle, a living fortress that walked the earth during the late Cretaceous period more than 70 million years ago. This remarkable animal was called Euoplocephalus, a name that means well-armoured head. True to its name, its entire body was covered in thick, bony plates, sharp spikes, and protective ridges that made it one of the most heavily defended creatures ever to roam the prehistoric world. But despite this incredible armour, one thing about it stood out in an almost comical way: its brain, which was astonishingly small, roughly the size of a lime. Nature had given Euoplocephalus a body that could withstand the bite of a tyrannosaur, but a brain that could barely process anything more complicated than eating, walking, and defending itself. Euoplocephalus was part of the Ankylosaur family, a group of dinosaurs known for their heavy armour and low, wide bodies. If you could travel back in time and stand next to one, you would see a creature that looked a bit like a cross between a giant lizard and a medieval tank. It was about 20 feet long from its blunt snout to the tip of its tail and weighed close to 3 tons. Its back was covered with thick, bony plates known as osteoderms, which acted like natural armour. Some of these plates were flat, while others were shaped like cones or spikes. They were embedded in its skin, forming a rough, uneven surface that would have made it difficult for any predator to bite into. Its sides were lined with spikes that pointed outward, warning any attacker that trying to grab it was a very bad idea. Even its eyelids had small bony plates for protection, turning the animal into a true walking fortress. However, all of this protection came at a cost. Euoplocephalus was not built for speed. Its legs were short and sturdy, meant to carry heavy weight rather than to run. It moved slowly, its body swaying slightly as it lumbered across the ground in search of plants to eat. Its head was low to the ground, perfect for feeding on ferns, cycads, and low shrubs that grew in the warm, lush environment of what is now North America. With its small leaf-shaped teeth, it would have snipped off bits of vegetation and ground them down with its powerful jaws. This was a dinosaur that lived a peaceful life, more interested in eating than fighting, unless it was attacked. But if something dared to attack Euoplocephalus, that was when its most famous weapon came into play. At the end of its tail was a massive bony club, an enlargement of fused vertebrae covered with solid bone. This tail club could be swung with tremendous force, and scientists believe it was strong enough to break the bones of predators like Apatosaurus, or even Tyrannosaurus rex if they got too close. The muscles near its hips were extremely strong, allowing it to swing that tail like a giant hammer. You could almost picture it standing its ground, lowering its armoured body and swatting at a charging predator with a single, bone-shattering blow. Few animals would have risked a direct confrontation after seeing what that tail could do. Yet, for all its impressive defences, Euoplocephalus was not a clever creature. Its brain was incredibly small compared to its massive body. Scientists studying its fossilised skulls have noted that the brain cavity was tiny, barely large enough to fit a lime. It likely had just enough mental capacity to recognise food, sense danger, and follow simple instincts. It probably did not think in any complex way or plan its actions. Its life was governed by routine and instinct, not intelligence. If something moved and looked dangerous, it would swing its tail. If it smelled plants, it would eat. If it sensed a threat, it would crouch down and rely on its armour. Everything it did was automatic, like a slow but sturdy machine designed by evolution to survive through strength, not cleverness. This simplicity made Euoplocephalus a fascinating contrast to some of the smarter dinosaurs that lived at the same time. Raptors, for example, had sharp claws and keen senses. They hunted in packs and may have communicated with each other. They had relatively larger brains, giving them the ability to strategize. Euoplocephalus, on the other hand, had no need for such mental sophistication. It didn't chase prey, didn't coordinate with others, and didn't need to outsmart anything. Its survival strategy was simple: stay armoured, stay still, and swing if threatened. This basic method worked incredibly well, as fossils show that these dinosaurs were widespread and lived successfully for millions of years. Its world was one filled with danger and wonder. The late Cretaceous landscape was rich with life, towering conifers, lush ferns, and flowering plants just beginning to spread across the earth. Giant herbivores like Triceratops and Edmontosaurus roamed the plains, while fierce predators like Tyrannosaurus rex ruled the food chain. Against this backdrop of colossal creatures, Euoplocephalus moved slowly through the greenery, chewing quietly and minding its own business. Its wide, low-slung body helped it stay close to the ground, allowing it to blend in somewhat with the landscape. Its thick, rough hide may have been patterned in shades of brown or grey, helping it blend with the earthy tones of its environment. It was not a flashy dinosaur. It was practical, steady, and built to last. Scientists have found several well-preserved fossils of Euoplocephalus in places like Alberta, Canada, particularly in the Dinosaur Park Formation, a region that has yielded some of the best dinosaur fossils in the world. These discoveries have given paleontologists detailed insights into how the animal looked and lived. Some fossils even preserve impressions of its skin and the arrangement of its armour plates. By studying these, experts have been able to reconstruct the dinosaur's appearance with impressive accuracy. The armour plates were arranged in neat rows along its back, with larger spikes along the sides for extra protection. The skull, broad and flat, had small nostrils and eyes set to the sides, giving it a limited field of vision but excellent awareness of its surroundings. It may not have been bright, but it was alert in its own simple way. Despite its heavy build, Euoplocephalus had some fascinating adaptations. One of the most interesting was its sense of smell. Though its brain was small, its nasal passages were complex and large, suggesting that it had a good sense of smell. This would have helped it locate food and perhaps even detect approaching predators before they got too close. Its hearing, however, was not as well developed, and its eyesight may have been only moderate. It likely relied more on its nose and the vibrations it felt through the ground than on vision or hearing to understand what was happening around it. When danger came, it would freeze, brace its short legs, lower its body, and prepare that massive tail for a defensive strike. The way Euoplocephalus moved was also quite distinctive. It walked on all fours, using its short but powerful legs to support its body. Its front legs were slightly shorter than its back legs, giving it a slight downward slope from tail to head. This posture helped it balance the heavy armour on its back and made it easier to swing its tail club. Its broad, flat feet had hoof-like toes that helped distribute its weight over the ground, preventing it from sinking into soft earth. Every step it took would have made a deep, thudding sound, like distant drums echoing through the ancient forests and plains. It probably didn't move far in a single day, perhaps just enough to find new patches of vegetation or to drink from nearby rivers or lakes. Its diet was strictly plant-based, and though it wasn't a picky eater, it preferred low-growing vegetation. Because it couldn't reach high branches like the towering sauropods, it focused on what grew near the ground. Its beak-like mouth was perfect for clipping tough plants, and its teeth were arranged in small rows that could grind food efficiently. Scientists believe that Euoplocephalus might have swallowed small stones, known as gastroliths, to help digest the fibrous plants in its stomach. These stones would grind against the plant material, breaking it down so the dinosaur could extract nutrients. This was a common trick among many herbivorous dinosaurs and showed that even a creature with a tiny brain could have effective ways to process its food. The armour of Euoplocephalus was one of its most impressive features and also one of the most studied. Each bony plate or osteoderm was covered by a thin layer of keratin, the same substance found in human fingernails and animal horns. Over time, these plates could vary in size and shape, making each individual slightly unique. The armour not only protected it, but also helped regulate its body temperature. The spaces between the plates may have allowed air to circulate, helping to cool the animal down in the heat of the day. It was nature's way of balancing protection and comfort. The spikes along its body made it nearly impossible for predators to flip it over, which would have been the only way to attack its unprotected belly. There was one place, however, where Euoplocephalus's armour was thinner: the head. Although the skull was still covered with bony ridges and plates, the brain inside was left with little defence beyond the bone surrounding it. This tiny organ, no bigger than a lime, controlled the entire body of a creature that could weigh several tons. It was a remarkable mismatch. If we were to compare it to a modern animal, it would be like an elephant with the brain of a pigeon. Yet somehow, it worked. Euoplocephalus didn't need intelligence to survive. It just needed to be tough, patient, and strong. The small brain also explains its simple behaviour. It likely lived a solitary life or moved in small, loose groups rather than organised herds. Social behaviour requires communication and awareness, things that demand a larger brain. Euoplocephalus probably didn't interact much with others except during the breeding season. Males may have used their tail clubs to fight for mates, swinging them in slow, powerful arcs to show dominance. These clashes would have been more about display than destruction. After all, breaking another Euoplocephalus's armour would be no easy task. Once mating season ended, they likely went their separate ways, each following its slow, steady routine of eating and surviving. The fossil record also suggests that Euoplocephalus had a few close relatives that looked very similar. In fact, for many years, scientists confused it with other armoured dinosaurs like Ankylosaurus and Stegosaurus. Only through careful study of its skull and armour pattern did paleontologists realise that Euoplocephalus was its own distinct species. These discoveries were made possible by the work of early fossil hunters in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, who uncovered remains from Canada's Badlands. Some of the best specimens were found by the famous fossil collector Charles Sternberg and his sons, who spent years exploring the fossil-rich formations of Alberta. The first fossils attributed to Euoplocephalus were described in the early 1900s, and since then, paleontologists have continued to study new finds that help fill in details about this fascinating creature's life. When we think about the Cretaceous period, it's easy to picture the fast, deadly predators or the towering plant-eaters that stretched their necks high into the trees. But Euoplocephalus represented a different kind of survival strategy. It wasn't fast or smart or graceful. It didn't need to be. Its defense was its intelligence, so to speak, a body so well protected that brains became unnecessary. Over millions of years, this design proved successful, showing that brute strength and defense could work just as well as speed or cunning. The very fact that Euoplocephalus fossils are found in abundance means they were thriving in their environment, living long enough to reproduce and pass on their genes. Even though it may not have been intelligent, Euoplocephalus was far from a simple creature in a biological sense. Its body was a masterpiece of evolution. The interlocking armor plates were perfectly shaped to allow flexibility, while still offering protection. Its tail club was not a random growth, but a carefully evolved weapon, supported by thick tendons and powerful muscles. Its skull had special air passages that might have helped it cool its blood or amplify low-frequency sounds. These are signs of a complex design that required countless generations to perfect. Evolution doesn't favour intelligence for its own sake. It favours whatever helps a species survive. In that regard, Euoplocephalus was one of nature's success stories. Life for Euoplocephalus was slow-paced but full of hidden dangers. Predators like Tyrannosaurus rex roamed nearby, always on the lookout for easy prey. Young Euoplocephalus, not yet fully armoured, would have been especially vulnerable. They probably relied on hiding or staying close to dense vegetation until they grew large enough to defend themselves. Adults, once fully armoured, were practically invincible except to the most determined or desperate predators. Even a hungry tyrannosaur might think twice before attacking a living battering ram covered in spikes. One strong tail swing could mean broken ribs or worse, so the giant predators usually focused on faster, less dangerous prey. During its lifetime, Euoplocephalus likely experienced seasonal changes. The climate of late Cretaceous North America was warm and humid, but there were wet and dry periods that affected plant growth. During dry seasons, food would become scarcer, and Euoplocephalus might have had to travel longer distances to find enough vegetation. It probably followed rivers or lakes, staying close to water sources. Its large, low body would have made swimming difficult, but it could wade through shallow waters to cool off or cross to new feeding grounds. Its slow movements and quiet nature made it a peaceful presence in the Cretaceous ecosystem, a living reminder that survival didn't always belong to the fastest or the brightest. When scientists reconstruct what Euoplocephalus might have looked like in life, they often depict it as a low, squat animal with a flat back, rough skin, and small eyes. Its nostrils may have flared outward slightly, helping it breathe easily while keeping its head close to the ground. Some artists imagine it covered in earthy tones, perhaps with darker patches to break up its outline. In a world filled with bright greens and deep browns, this would have made it even harder for predators to spot until it was too late. The heavy clanking of its armour would have echoed softly as it moved, giving the impression of an ancient machine going about its daily routine. Despite its small brain, Euoplocephalus was not entirely unaware of its surroundings. It had reflexes honed by evolution. If a shadow passed overhead, it might instinctively crouch. If the ground trembled, it would tighten its stance and prepare to swing. These reflexes, not conscious thought, kept it alive. Its reactions were fast and automatic, the result of millions of years of fine-tuning by natural selection. And while it may not have been clever in the human sense, it was perfectly suited to its role in the prehistoric world. Its eventual extinction, like that of all non-avian dinosaurs, came about 66 million years ago, when a massive asteroid struck the Earth and changed the planet's climate drastically. The impact sent clouds of dust into the sky, blocking sunlight and causing temperatures to drop. Plants withered, and the food chain collapsed. Even the mighty Euoplocephalus, with all its armour, could not protect itself from starvation and the environmental chaos that followed. But before that catastrophe, it had enjoyed millions of years of success, proving that sometimes slow and steady really does win the race. Therizinosaurus was a creature so strange and so unlike anything else that ever walked the Earth. Scientists have had to pause and rethink what they knew about dinosaurs. Therizinosaurus was a bizarre, long-clawed, feather-covered dinosaur that looked more like a nightmare stitched together from pieces of other animals than a single purposeful design. It had the arms of a monster, the neck of an ostrich, the body of a pot-bellied giant, and the brain of something that might not have always been sure what it was doing. Everything about Therizinosaurus seemed odd, mismatched, and clumsy, as if nature had accidentally spilled its imagination all over it and decided to keep it that way. Therizinosaurus lived around 70 million years ago during the late Cretaceous period, in what is now Mongolia. Back then, the Earth was warm, and vast plains were covered with ferns, cycads, and flowering plants. Great rivers carved through the land, and herds of dinosaurs roamed in search of food. It was a world full of predators like the fearsome Tarbosaurus, cousins of the famous Tyrannosaurus rex. But in that same world lived Therizinosaurus, a slow, strange herbivore with claws longer than those of any other animal known to science. Some of its claws could stretch up to 3 feet long, curved like giant scythes, perfect for reaching vegetation high above the ground or for pulling branches close to its beaked mouth. These claws were so huge that when scientists first discovered them in the 1940s, they thought they belonged to a giant meat-eating dinosaur. No one could have imagined that such terrifying weapons were actually attached to a gentle, slow plant-eater. The first fossils of Therizinosaurus were found in the Gobi Desert, an ancient land of red rocks and silent winds. Soviet and Mongolian paleontologists uncovered massive claw bones unlike anything they had ever seen before. These claws looked sharp enough to slice through almost anything, and for many years scientists believed that the creature must have been a huge predator, perhaps using those claws to rip apart its prey. But as more fossils were discovered later, the mystery began to clear. Pieces of its skeleton, its wide hips, small head, and plant-chewing teeth, told a very different story. Therizinosaurus, despite its terrifying appearance, was not a hunter, but an eater of plants. What made it even stranger was its body shape. It stood upright on 2 thick, muscular legs, and its belly was wide and round, suggesting a large digestive system built for processing tough vegetation. Its long neck stretched forward like that of a goose, while its head remained small, topped with a beak and lined with leaf-shaped teeth. Its eyes were positioned on the sides of its head, a common trait among plant-eaters, allowing it to watch for danger while it fed. Yet its arms were the most unbelievable part, long, powerful, and ending in claws that looked more suited for destruction than dining. Many scientists believe that those claws were not meant for fighting but for pulling down branches or defending against predators when necessary. With such claws, Therizinosaurus could have easily hooked onto trees and stripped them of their leaves, using its long arms like grappling tools. But even with those deadly-looking appendages, it probably moved slowly. Its massive size and awkward build meant it could not run fast or turn quickly. Its legs, though strong, were not shaped for speed but for supporting weight. Its brain was small, far smaller than those of more active dinosaurs, which suggests that it reacted sluggishly to its surroundings. If danger approached, it might have taken a few moments to even realize it, let alone respond. The slow-witted nature of Therizinosaurus adds a layer of tragic comedy to its story. Here was an animal equipped with some of the most fearsome claws in all of history, yet it probably didn't have the mental sharpness to use them efficiently. It lived its life likely unaware of how frightening it appeared. To other creatures, it may have seemed like a lumbering menace, but in truth, it was probably just a confused herbivore swaying among the trees, snipping leaves and ferns while trying not to trip over its own massive feet. Despite its clumsiness, Therizinosaurus was a survivor. Its strange appearance was the result of millions of years of evolution, shaped by the environment it lived in. The Gobi region during the Cretaceous was filled with vegetation that grew in tall clusters. Other herbivores like hadrosaurs grazed closer to the ground, but Therizinosaurus specialized in feeding on the higher branches that others couldn't reach. Its claws acted like long arms, allowing it to grasp vegetation much as a human might reach up to pluck fruit. Its large gut helped it digest fibrous plants that others could not handle. Nature, in its strange way, had built it for a specific purpose, even if it looked ridiculous doing it. Therizinosaurus also had feathers, not the kind used for flight, but long hair-like filaments that may have covered parts of its body. These feathers might have helped regulate its body temperature or been used in displays to attract mates or scare off predators. Imagine a huge, feathered creature nearly 30 feet long and weighing several tons, waving its arms lined with claws the length of a grown man's arm. The sight alone could have frightened away smaller attackers, even if Therizinosaurus didn't intend to fight. Its sheer presence was likely enough to command respect from anything nearby. But with such a small brain, it is doubtful that Therizinosaurus was capable of complex thinking. Its behavior was probably guided mostly by instinct. It likely spent most of its day foraging, using its long neck and arms to gather food while slowly moving across the plains. When it needed to defend itself, it might have swung its arms in wide arcs, the curved claws cutting through the air like blades. Such a motion, even if done slowly, could have delivered devastating blows to any predator foolish enough to get too close. Scientists have compared the brain of Therizinosaurus to that of a reptile rather than a bird, even though it was part of a group of theropods more closely related to modern birds. This means it probably didn't have the same sharp reflexes or quick problem-solving abilities that later evolved in avian descendants. It was a living contradiction, a bird-like dinosaur that lacked the grace or cleverness of birds. Its small head and long body created coordination challenges. Signals from its brain to its tail would have taken noticeable time to travel through its nervous system. That means if something bit its tail, it might have taken a moment for its brain to even register the pain. The slow reaction speed of Therizinosaurus made it vulnerable, and yet few predators would have dared attack it directly. The claws alone were enough to make even a Tarbosaurus think twice. A single swing could leave deep gashes or break bones. In a way, its best defense was intimidation, standing tall, raising its enormous arms, and letting its claws gleam in the sunlight. The predator might decide that there were easier meals elsewhere. Therizinosaurus was part of a strange branch of theropod dinosaurs called Therizinosaurs, all of which shared similar features: long necks, small heads, big bellies, and giant claws. But among them all, Therizinosaurus was the largest and most extreme. It could grow up to 33 feet long and possibly weigh more than 5 tons. Yet despite its size, it was not an active giant like the sauropods. It was slower, more awkward, almost comically shaped. Its legs were positioned more like a waddling bird's, and its body leaned slightly forward, giving it an ungainly posture. It might have moved with heavy, deliberate steps, its head bobbing as it looked for food. Its diet consisted mostly of tough plants, ferns, cycads, and maybe even fruits from ancient flowering trees. Using its long claws, it could gather branches closer and strip them clean. Its beak, though not large, was sharp enough to snip leaves efficiently. Once the food was inside, its large gut took care of digestion, possibly aided by bacteria that helped break down plant fibers. Its stomach would have worked slowly, much like that of modern herbivores such as elephants, processing huge amounts of vegetation each day to sustain its massive body. Even though it was slow and clumsy, Therizinosaurus played an important role in its ecosystem. By feeding on high vegetation, it helped shape the landscape, clearing paths through forests and spreading plant seeds through its droppings. Other animals may have followed behind it, feeding on what it left behind or using the open spaces it created. In this way, even a dinosaur that might seem foolish or awkward had its place in the balance of life. One can almost picture a day in the life of Therizinosaurus, the sun rising over the ancient Mongolian plains, lighting up the reddish soil while the feathered giant slowly stirs. Its long arms stretch outward, claws glinting in the dawn light. It moves toward a grove of tall plants, stopping every few steps to pull down a branch and munch contentedly. In the distance, smaller dinosaurs scatter, unwilling to get too close to such a strange-looking creature. A predator watches, calculating whether it's worth the risk. The Therizinosaurus turns its head lazily, perhaps sensing movement but not reacting quickly. Then, with an almost casual motion, it swings one massive arm slicing through the air. The predator retreats. The message is clear. This awkward, slow-moving giant might not be fast, but it is far from harmless. Its feathers may also have served another purpose: communication. Some scientists think that Therizinosaurus could have used its feathered body in courtship displays, perhaps spreading its arms or fluffing its feathers to attract mates. If that's true, the males might have competed not with battles but with beauty, showing off their strange appearance to impress females. Such behaviour would make the species even more unique, a creature that mixed menace with elegance, armed with deadly claws but more concerned with leaves and love than bloodshed. Yet the mystery of how such an animal evolved remains one of paleontology's most fascinating puzzles. How did a family of meat-eating theropods, once swift and dangerous predators, turn into these slow, plant-eating giants? The answer likely lies in the changing environment. As plants diversified during the Cretaceous period, new ecological opportunities opened up. Some theropods began adapting to this vegetarian lifestyle, gradually losing their sharp teeth and gaining beaks and larger bellies. Over time, their claws became tools for feeding rather than hunting. Therizinosaurus was the most extreme result of that long transformation, a predator's body reshaped by evolution into something gentle and strange. Fossils of its relatives show how this change happened step by step. Earlier Therizinosaurs were smaller and lighter, with shorter claws and more typical theropod features. As millions of years passed, they became bulkier and more adapted to eating plants. By the time Therizinosaurus appeared, evolution had gone all in on this odd design. It was as if nature had taken all the features that made no sense together, claws for killing, a beak for nibbling, feathers for warmth, and fused them into one animal that somehow worked. If you stood beside a Therizinosaurus, you would feel both awe and confusion. It would tower above you, its neck stretching high, its long arms dangling almost to its knees. Each claw could be as long as your entire arm. Its body would be covered with shaggy feathers, rustling slightly in the breeze. Its small head, with its beady eyes and blunt beak, would not look threatening. It might even seem comical, like a giant bird lost in thought. Yet, as it moved, every step would remind you of its power. The ground would tremble slightly under its weight, and when it raised its claws, they would glisten like polished scythes in the sunlight. Despite its fearsome appearance, Therizinosaurus probably led a calm, almost peaceful life. It had no need to chase prey or fight for dominance. Its food was everywhere, the green leaves of trees and shrubs that surrounded it. Its main challenges were survival and reproduction. When nesting season came, it might have built large nests on the ground, laying eggs that looked more like those of birds than reptiles. Both parents may have guarded the nest, using their size and claws to keep predators away. Such behaviour is suggested by fossils of related species that show brooding postures similar to those of modern birds. The discovery of Therizinosaurus also changed how scientists viewed dinosaurs as a whole. Before it was properly understood, many believed that all theropods were carnivores. The idea that one could become a gentle herbivore seemed absurd. But the evidence from Therizinosaurus proved otherwise, showing that even creatures designed for killing could evolve into peaceful plant eaters if the environment favoured it. Its claws, once thought to be weapons, turned out to be tools. Its strange body became a symbol of evolution's creativity. Proof that life can take any path, even the strangest ones. There is also something deeply fascinating about how such a creature balanced power and awkwardness. Its claws could easily have torn flesh, yet it used them for gathering leaves. Its size could have made it unstoppable, but it was too slow to chase or flee. It was a dinosaur of contradictions, a living reminder that strength does not always mean intelligence or speed. Its small head and slow reactions would have made it one of the least clever dinosaurs of its kind, yet that did not stop it from thriving for millions of years. To this day, Therizinosaurus remains one of the most peculiar animals ever found. Artists struggle to depict it accurately because it seems almost unreal. Part reptile, part bird, part something else entirely. Its fossils, now displayed in museums around the world, continue to draw crowds who stare in disbelief at those gigantic claws. They look like they belong to a monster from a fantasy tale rather than a real animal that once walked the earth. Yet it was real as any creature that ever lived. When one imagines Therizinosaurus moving through the Cretaceous landscape surrounded by the calls of other dinosaurs and the rustle of ancient plants, it's easy to see why it fascinates people even today. It represents the side of nature that doesn't make perfect sense but still finds a way to survive. Its small brain may have made it slow and clumsy, but it didn't need cleverness to fulfill its role in the prehistoric world. Its claws, belly and beak were enough. Therizinosaurus, with its long arms, enormous claws and almost gentle manner, reminds us that not every creature needed to be fast or smart to endure. It stood tall, strange and slow, a creature out of place in its own time, yet perfectly adapted to its surroundings. While other dinosaurs chased, fought and roared, this one simply stood in the shade of trees, calmly plucking at the leaves, moving at its own unhurried pace through a world that must have seemed both dangerous and beautiful.